Test 1, 2, 3. So Ron, we're ready to start whenever you are.
Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Foresters for Healthy Waters workshop. First, I want to say special thanks to NC State Extension for hosting the workshop, Dr. Bob Barden. Bob, if you would, maybe a few ground rules for the workshop up front on how to interact with the speakers.
Be happy to. So we'll be taking questions today through the Q&A feature of Zoom. If you look at the bottom of your Zoom window, you'll see a little Q&A icon. If you click on that, you'll be able to ask your questions of the presenters. If some other issue comes up that you need to get attention of one of the presenters or myself as the logistics person running the behind the scenes stuff, please use the chat window for that. We ask that you minimize the chat, though, to things that are specific about today's webinar so that we don't lose any of your information as far as trying to help you and things like that. We'll take the questions and answers. Feel free to type them in as we go. We will be stopping periodically during today's workshop to answer those questions, and we'll try to get them all addressed either during the session in which they're taking place, but if we run out of time during that session, we will have time at the end of today's workshop to also address those questions. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Ron.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate that. Also wanted to let the participants know that the virtual workshop is being recorded, so you can also view it at a later date. We'll also be sharing some links to some resources and documents that are presented or shared during the workshop. And we hope to have a dedicated web page where this program and some of the resource documents, you can find them after the webinar. Also, this workshop qualifies for 4 SAF CFEs, but you have to participate through the entire program. And at the end, there'll be a series of questions or surveys or some polls throughout the workshop just to gauge people's interest, knowledge level, and get feedback from the participants as well. With that, we're going to move on. My role is pretty easy. I'm here in the beginning to set the stage, provide some overview about our agency, a little bit about the project, our involvement, and then get out of the way and let our presenters discuss some important things that relates to this project and also important rare aquatic species along with protecting water quality. So I am the Forest Management Program Head with the North Carolina Forest Service. We are a division within the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, and we have an Agriculture Commissioner, Steve Troxler. A little bit about our agency, a shameless plug. Our mission is to protect, manage, and promote forest resources for the citizens of North Carolina. We work primarily with non-industrial private landowners to provide several programs and services. Mostly what we do is provide technical assistance through plan preparation services and a variety of other programs and services such as forestation, burning, tree planting services, along with water quality inspections and wildfire incident response. We work with non-industrial private landowners. We provide a list of technical service providers and contractors. We match them up with the work that they're interested in doing so they can seek out qualified plan writers and contractors to implement the work. And we also offer financial assistance when available through our state cost share programs or other financial incentives and programs that become available. Our agency has a long history of working with consulting and registered foresters along with our conservation partners. And primarily this is through timber harvest or referral to consultants, matching them up with work that they can do later on that we cannot provide as a service. I wanted to share a little bit about some results from the National Woodland Owner Survey of family forests. Family forests, 10 plus acres, 83% of our North Carolina forests are privately owned, and the majority of those are family forests, 56%, 10 plus acres. The mean size is about 53 acres. Looking at the survey data, these are some of the things that we know is very small percentage have a management plan, 18%. 20% have sought management advice. So as you can see, we have our work cut out for us as resource professionals to try to reach more landowners and provide assistance. They also, in the survey, they look at, the top reasons for owning forests. Among the top 5 is beauty, scenery, privacy, but also in the top 5 are wildlife habitat, nature protection, and water protection. So want to think about those last 3 there and why this project kind of fits in with providing additional information and assistance on those reasons for owning property. Among the top 10 concerns of woodland owners in North Carolina, water pollution and government regulation rank in the top 10. Water pollution is 5, government regulation, I believe, is 8. So, think about those 2 aspects of their concerns and why it's important to have a project that addresses some of their concerns. A little bit of background on the project. Our agency, namely our Water Resources Branch, frequently provides forestry comments during ESA species listings within North Carolina. We often cite the effectiveness of already existing FPGs and BMPs. And in our comments, we oftentimes encourage ongoing collaboration. So some of these comments actually led to discussions between agencies who've been at the table, but maybe, on different sides or different viewpoints to try to come together. And this is how this pilot partnership project came about, is conversations and see what we can do collectively working together. This project involves grant funding from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to the North Carolina Forest Service to voluntarily work with private landowners in a focus area. And we'll show that later on today. Some of our conservation partners assisting with this project include U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Wildlife Resources Commission, NC State Extension Forestry, NC Tree Farm, NC Forest Stewardship Program, Natural Heritage Program, and natural resource practitioners. So a broad coalition of partners on this project. What is this project program goal? I was thinking about it. Essentially, our program goal is to provide financial and technical assistance to woodland owners to work with natural resource professionals within a 7-county focus area to achieve the following. We want to provide education and awareness of the benefits from forest planning. We want to develop comprehensive pre-harvest plans for tracts with upcoming harvest or thinning operations within the next 2 or 3 years, ideally. And we want to recommend best management practices and proactive measures that protect both water quality and rare aquatic species. We do have a few goals for our workshop today. Most important one, and probably why you're here, is education and information. I think we all, myself included, want to learn more about information on aquatic species and habitat, and maybe some protective measures that can be recommended or implemented. During this program, as we mentioned before, it involves financial assistance. So there's a process. We have some forms, we have some handbooks. So we're going to review these program documents and components so that if you're a plan writer or natural resource professional, you can understand what it involves to participate in the program and work with landowners. You're going to get today an overview of some helpful resources and tools, things that you can use in your day-to-day business or incorporate into plans or working with landowners. We have a question and answer session. A lot of times participants have questions, want to know more about certain topics. So we have plenty of time during our breaks and the Q&A sessions for that. Part of the reason and the goal of the workshop as well is to have a certification of plan writers have the plan writers go through a formal training, whether today or viewing it in the recorded session, and understand what the project is about, what the components entail, and then have a listing that we can share with landowners who are interested in working with natural resource professionals to prepare these type of plans. One of the other benefits of this workshop and the project is a partnership with Natural Heritage. They were willing to offer a time-limited use, 1 year of Natural Heritage Data Explorer tool. And I will provide my email at the end. There'll be a poll question. So if you're a natural resource professional and you're interested in writing plans and working with landowners in the focus area, send me an email and we'll create a user group and allow you to have access to this benefit that the Natural Heritage is providing to us for this project. And that is all I have, Bob. We'll go to the next speaker.
So John Ann, if you want to share your screen.
It's coming up here.
There you go.
All right, well, good morning. Hope everybody's doing well. I'm John Ann Scherer, and I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service out of Raleigh. And I know some of you because I have the good fortune of working with private landowners and their foresters and managers on habitat restoration through our Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. So I'm going to give you an introduction to the Foresters for Healthy Waters program, which is being cooperatively led by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the North Carolina Forest Service. I really appreciate you all attending today. Look forward to spending the day with you. So the idea for the program came around when critical habitat for the yellow lance mussel was proposed. And folks from the North Carolina Forest Service were a little bit concerned about restrictions to forest management and began talking to us about ways that we could promote forest management practices that would benefit these species, the species like the yellow lance, sort of in a voluntary way and a proactive way, rather than a threatening or a regulatory way. And one thing you'll hear today is that the area that we're focusing on, the Upper Tar and Neuse River watersheds, has a lot of rare species, and there is a reason that those species are still there. And that is because it's mostly forested and is generally in good condition, and we want to keep it that way. There's not big problems to address, but there are opportunities to prevent problems. And so that's where we're coming from on that. So after many conversations that centered really on education and ideal forest management practices, we came up with the idea to create this program specifically geared towards harvest. And, it's during harvest operation when the impacts to water quality and aquatic habitat happen. So we said, oh, let's focus there. Let's find a tool to help us meet our needs, to meet the needs of landowners, prevent damage to waterways, in particularly in these critical areas and at these critical times in harvest. So Foresters for Healthy Waters is a time-limited, localized pilot project, and it's cooperatively developed by these two agencies, as you've heard, and it's designed to protect habitat for rare aquatic species in the Upper Tar and Neuse River watersheds in North Carolina, particularly during forest harvest operations. So yes, there are regulations in place, but this program is designed to help go above and beyond what might be the normal practices, to take extra time, to make extra effort, to be certain that water quality is considered and protected during harvest operations. So the two main components of Foresters for Healthy Waters is education and cost share for pre-harvest plans. So the program offers education through this workshop and materials and resources that you'll be hearing more about. And the program offers cost share for pre-harvest plans examples for those plans, and the practices to be included in those plans. So after this workshop, you will be considered certified to write pre-harvest plans that will qualify for the cost share reimbursement. You all know better than anyone that landowners generally have more than one objective for their land. Their interest should come first. Even at a time of harvest, there's a balancing act to meet the needs and desires of our landowners. I'm sure you know exactly what I mean, always a balancing act. And through this program, which is voluntary, we expect and hope for you to consider all the needs and concerns for your landowners. These 7 counties are the focus of the program, regardless of whether there's a stream on the property or not, and regardless of what watershed the property falls into. If the landowner is harvesting in these 7 counties, then they're eligible for this program. And the purpose of the workshop today is to provide you with details. Details like eligibility, things like we're for private landowners preparing to harvest 10 acres or more. And this will all be available on the 1st of July. Today, you'll learn about the expectations for your pre-harvest plans, such things as, the basic landowner and property information, maps, information on nearby rare species. And your plans will include details on how to handle things like stream crossings and deck placements, SMZs, and other things like that that you consider during a harvest operation. So to guide you through this process and to put all the information into one place, there's a Foresters for Healthy Waters Handbook. This has been provided to you or will be again through a link. And the workshop today is structured to follow the handbook. So it includes sections, as you'll see here, on background, aquatic species, eligibility, plans and the plan writers, funding and administration, all the different elements of the plans, as well as tools and a checklist. So why should you participate in this program? Well, we hope that this program and workshop will expand your knowledge on rare species and those things that you can do to benefit those rare species, the things that you can do in your own work each day. So the additional resources, particularly that 1-year access to the Natural Heritage Data Explorer, should be helpful for these plans, as well as any plans that you're writing. We are also hopeful that having a clear pre-harvest plan with all the details in advance of the harvest will make it easier for your loggers and buyers to know exactly what they're getting into in advance. And of course, we hope that you'll be able to better meet the objectives of landowners. And the reason we're spending public dollars on private lands is for a public benefit. And that public benefit is to protect water quality and aquatic habitat. So if nothing more today, at least you'll be getting some CFEs, right? So I really appreciate your attendance today. We really value your input. I know that you'll have to type your questions, but we really would love the interaction and feedback. It's a pilot project, so we are learning at the same time that we're teaching. So thank you very much. Really appreciate you being here.
All right, if you got any questions, remember to type them into the Q&A feature and we will address those as we go. And next up, we will hear from Jennifer. Jennifer?
Hello. Let's see. Get into presentation mode. Okay, hopefully y'all can see that. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'll be covering an introduction to the rare aquatic species. The Tar Basin makes up most of this pilot area, but the tar and noose are very similar in aquatic fauna. So this might be useful if you work in the Tar Basin as well. And as I was putting this presentation together, I was reminded of a quote I share oftentimes when giving presentations. And I thought it especially fitting here because it's attributed to a forester. In the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught. So I hope you'll take away a couple of things about the rare aquatic species in our area today. The objectives of this talk are to introduce the federally listed and at-risk aquatic animals in the pilot project area, to share their listing status under the Endangered Species Act, talk about the basic needs of these species, and give an overview of where they occur and where their critical habitats are located, and talk about how they're doing, what their current condition is, and what the stressors are. And then we'll connect forest management and protected species as I wrap up at the end. So first, we'll cover the species, the threatened, endangered, and at-risk aquatic animals. I'll start with the vertebrates. We've got 2 of them. On the left is the Neuse River water dog, which is a permanently aquatic salamander. And you can see its external gills on the side of its neck there. They don't have lungs, and this is the way they breathe. Those are very exposed in the water column. And on the right is the Carolina mad tom. This is a very small catfish species with a powerful punch. Its scientific name is Noturus furiosus, and that furiosus comes from the fact that it has the strongest venom of all catfish that we know of in those pectoral spines. We have 5 mollusks, all mussels in the Tar and Neuse River Basin that are listed or at risk, and I'll go clockwise from top left is the Tar River spiny mussel. This is a picture of young mussels, and you can see those spines developing. There are only 3 species that we know of in the world that have spines like this, and they all occur on the US East Coast. Next, on the right, nestled into some nice coarse sand and gravel substrate, is the dwarf wedge mussel. Bottom right is the yellow lance with that characteristic golden color and lance-shaped elongated body. Middle is the Atlantic pigtoe. And then on the bottom left is a green floater mussel. 3 of these species are endemic species, the Tar River spiny mussel, the Neuse River water dog, and the Carolina mad tom. And in this context, endemic means that these species occur in the Neuse and Tar basins and nowhere else on the planet. So it just kind of emphasizes the importance of these river basins and how special they are aquatically. The listing status of each of these are on this table. So the Tar River spiny mussel and dwarf wedge mussel are endangered. The Carolina mad tom is proposed endangered. Yellow lance is a threatened species. Atlantic pigtoe and Neuse River water dog are proposed threatened, and the green floater is an at-risk species. And you'll notice there's an asterisk by the Carolina mad tom and Neuse River water dog. Those are going to change to their final listing status. I just found out this morning, next week. So you'll see those are endangered and threatened as of next week. So what do these mean? These terms mean endangered is a species at risk of becoming extinct in all or a significant portion of its range. A threatened species is one that is at risk of becoming endangered in the foreseeable future in all or a portion of its range. And at-risk species are those that are in decline. They often have been petitioned for listing or are a candidate species for listing, but have not yet been listed at this stage. So I'll go over some life history basics of these species, just so you kind of understand what their needs are in their aquatic habitats. And we'll start with the Carolina mad tom. This little catfish lives on the stream bottom over gravel and sand. And we know from scientific research that it avoids fine silts. So sedimentation is not good for this species. It needs structure. It likes boulders or woody debris as cover or other shelter. And it may even use things like broken antique clay pots, things that are just in the water. It nests under structure like these little pots, and males guard the nest. We know that because those that were collected in the past have empty stomachs. So they're fierce fathers and they don't leave the nest once the females lay the eggs. They prefer shallow flowing water habitats, and they eat primarily aquatic insects. It takes them 2 to 3 years to mature, and they may only live for 4 years. Those that have been collected have been 4 years old. So if they live a little bit longer, it's not much. And that tells you that they have a fairly short window of time to contribute to continuing the species. And if you haven't spotted it yet, there is a little Carolina mad tom hiding under this relict mussel shell in this picture. And there's also a bonus mussel that you may or may not have picked out. You can see the aperture sticking up where it can siphon the surface water in that photo. Okay, let's talk about the Neuse River water dog for just a moment. This species also lives at the stream bottom over clean gravel and sand, or potentially in hard clay bottoms in the coastal plain. It needs structure as well, boulders and woody debris, or when you get to the coastal plain where there aren't a lot of boulders, it may also use cover like holes and banks. They eat a variety of things, but largely insects and other invertebrates. Some of the larger water dogs may even consume small invertebrates like little fishes. They nest under structure like that picture on the bottom shows. They like to be under rocks if they can. And they also need flowing water habitats. So they tend to disappear from areas that are dammed up. And they've always been found in flowing water, none in lakes or ponds. It takes this species about 6 years to mature. And we don't know exactly how long they live, but one of their cousins that in the same genus lives to more than 30 years. So we expect their lifespan is similar. So let's talk about the mussels. All mussels are a little bit different. They do have their specific habitat needs and reproductive strategies, but they've got a lot in common. So let's just talk about them all together. Just like the other species, they rely on the stream substrates. They actually live in the stream substrate, like you see that dwarf wedge mussel nestled in there. And most species tend to like coarse sand and gravel or rocks. Uncompacted substrate is really what they need. So they need flowing water habitat. They need stable streams, and they need a clean bottom. They also need fishes for development and dispersal. They have a unique life history that I'll discuss in a little more detail on the next slide. And they are filter feeders. So they eat algae and bacteria, and they filter out other particles from the water column, which helps clean the water. And they're also able to digest and deactivate harmful pathogens like E. coli. Depending on the species, they can mature in a few to several years. So it does take them a while, even though they're invertebrates. And across this family of mussels, they have lifespans that can range from 10 to over 100 years, which is a really long time for an invertebrate. The species you see pictured here are on the shorter to moderate end of that lifespan and tend to live between 10 and 30 years. So a little more about that connection with fishes and why they also need good fish habitat for mussels to survive is that they have a parasitic life stage where they require a fish for both development and dispersal. So on the bottom of this picture, you see that they do undergo sexual reproduction. So a male mussel has to release sperm into the water, and a female has to encounter that. So that's already a precarious stage. Once those eggs are fertilized, they develop into larvae. We have a fancy term for that, but there's no need for jargon today. And so those larvae then have to somehow get on a fish host where they will stay for a few weeks and undergo metamorphosis. So just like a caterpillar turns into a butterfly in its cocoon, this little Pac-Man of a larva turns into a fully formed mussel when it's on the fish. And mussel moms have several strategies for facilitating that. Some of them just broadcast spawn into the water. Others might package their larvae into small packets. For instance, this is the egg packets of an Atlantic pigtoe mussel. They're kind of pink and wormy, and they target drift feeding minnows, which are their hosts. And not just any host will do. All these species have a particular fish or suite of fishes that they need to complete their life cycle. Some mussels even have lures. So these mussels get pretty fancy, and this is actually a part of the mussel's body. So this female has a lure, and maybe it looks like a minnow or a hellgrammite or something, and she's pulsing it. And what you see sticking up there in the middle is her water tubes full of larvae. So say maybe a bass comes down, it thinks it's going to get a meal, and instead it gets a face full of babies. And hopefully the life cycle continues. So let's move on to talking about critical habitat for endangered and threatened species. First, what is designated critical habitat? This is habitat that contains features essential to the conservation of a species and which may require special management and protection. So a couple things to note about this is this term is specific to the Endangered Species Act, and it is specific areas that are designated as needed for recovery. So it might not be the only important habitat that a species relies on, but it is an area that we've designated. A couple other important things to know is that critical habitat has not been designated for all species. So especially some of the species that were listed longer ago, like Tar River Spiny Mussel and Dwarf Wedge Mussel, there's not a line on a map for critical habitat, but of course they need aquatic habitat to continue. And many species may and do occur outside designated critical habitat areas. Maybe they're found in other areas after critical habitat was designated, or only a portion of their range might have been designated as critical habitat areas. And finally, we use this partially as a public awareness tool. It's helpful for you to see a line on a map and know that that's a particularly important area for aquatic species. And we can also use it as a consultation tool in our work with other federal agencies. So designated critical habitats in the Foresters for Healthy Waters area include that for 4 species. And the picture on the right shows an outline of the Tar River Basin, and below that the noose. They're just easy to show together. And so all those black lines are rivers with critical habitat. And we've got the yellow lance critical habitat, which was proposed a long time ago and just finally designated, finalized in April. I mentioned Carolina Mad Tom and Neuse River Water Dog's final listing will be out next week. And so their critical habitat will also be finalized next week. And Atlantic pigtoe is proposed, and their final critical habitat will be imminent as well. We expect that later on this summer. So just to zoom in on that 7-county area where this pilot program is occurring, all those squiggly lines shown on the map are designated critical habitat areas, either proposed or finalized. Most of it is in the Tar. We catch a little bit of the Little River and the Neuse Basin, and a little bit of habitat here in the Roanoke, but most of these lines are in the Upper Tar. So let's talk a bit about the status of the species, meaning how are these species doing, touch on what some of the stressors are, and the importance of these Eastern North Carolina habitats. So how do we measure species status? There's a couple ways we can do that. For species that are already listed, we're mandated to conduct 5-year status reviews for these species. And we use the best available science from our partners, state agencies, lots of partners, academia, to help us understand if the species is increasing or decreasing or stable. We evaluate whether recovery criteria have been met, and then we can make recommendations whether or not to change the listing or to change it by uplisting, downlisting, or delisting a species. Another way we can measure species status is through species status assessments. This is a newer tool that's been relied on in the past several years. We can use these for listed species as well. They've been primarily used for assessing species that have been petitioned for listing. And so we can assess population and habitat factors. How abundant are these animals in a population? How big are the populations? How widespread are they? And also habitat factors. Is it in good shape? Is it degraded? And that sort of thing. From that, we can determine their population condition. And we rank those whether they're low, medium, or highly resilient. So are they in good shape or not so good shape? We have SSAs for 4 of the 7 species that I'm talking about today, and I'll just give you a snapshot of their current condition. So in these maps, green equals good. These maps are old and they use the stoplight coloring. So I'm going to do my best to point out where the green is because I don't think they're very colorblind friendly. But we'll start with the Neuse River Water Dog. So green is good. And there are 2 populations that have high resiliency or are in green in the Upper Tar River Basin, as well as a moderately good population. The Carolina Mad Tom's only remaining good population is in the Upper Tar Basin, as well as a moderate population. And all this gray you see are where they are presumed extirpated. Remember, I said these species are endemic, so this is the entirety of their range in these two basins. For the Atlantic pigtoe, they range a little wider, but you'll see the only blip of green is in the upper tar. And same for the yellow lance. The only highly and moderately resilient populations are in the upper tar here. For a few other species, the Tar River spiny mussel underwent a 5-year review last year. We know that it's still declining, but its last stronghold is in the tar. The dwarf wedge mussel is declining in the southern portion of its range, which includes North Carolina, and it ranges all the way to New York with very disjunct populations. The green floater will have an SSA coming in the future. We know that it's declining and it's in fairly low condition in many of its southern part of the range here. So this just really emphasizes how important the upper Tar River Basin area is for these aquatic species and why we want to promote protection here. So why are they in bad shape? Why are they declining? These species undergo a variety of stressors, but a lot of them boil down to habitat loss and degradation. And this leads to reduced, fragmented, and isolated populations, which reduces their ability to reproduce. So just a couple of pictures here to illustrate that. You see a lot of sedimentation in that river in the bottom picture, heavy sediment load. There's a point source pollution there with a pipe coming out of it. It could be chemically contaminated or something like that. And then we have non-point source runoff, from development, stormwater runoff, that sort of thing. And the reservoirs, we dam up an area and create a big old reservoir. That's not great for riverine species that rely on that riverine habitat. And it doesn't have to be an example as extreme as this. In fact, even beaver dams can cause issues for these riverine species. Another stressor is invasive species. So here are a few that are on our hot list here in North Carolina. The red swamp crayfish on the left is one that our Neuse River water dog species experts tell us when they see that animal, then they stop seeing Neuse River water dogs, even though water dogs can cohabitate with our native crayfish. This one that is used in aquaculture is no good for that species. On the right-hand side, you see a large invasive flathead catfish. They are known for targeting other catfish species, and they may be gobbling up Carolina mad toms and Neuse River water dogs. And then in the center there is the Asian clam, Corbicula. You have probably seen middens of these shells along rivers, streams, and lake edges. And there's mounting evidence that they do directly compete with our native mussel species. So I hope that I've illustrated that the Foresters for Healthy Waters pilot area contains some very high quality habitats. That's why these species are still doing better in this area. And this area is key to our conservation strategies. It's absolutely essential to preventing extinction for some of our most critically imperiled species, especially endemics like the Tar River spiny mussel and the Carolina mad tom pictured here. And it's very important for recovery of all the species that I've just talked about. So let's connect forest management just a little bit here at the end. The Clean Water Act starts out with its objective to restore and maintain the chemical, biological, and physical integrity of the nation's waters, and water quality, which provides for the protection and propagation of fish, shellfish, and wildlife. And so, the conception, the beginning of BMPs was to address some of those things. And so forestry best management practices do focus a lot on physical and chemical parameters, but those can also directly address protection of the biological parameters like these rare species that we just talked about. So in summary, the Foresters for Healthy Waters project area supports 7 federally listed and at-risk species. They all generally need clean flowing water and good stream bottom habitat. Many streams are designated as critical habitat for recovery. All of these species are declining, and some of the primary stressors include sedimentation, impaired water quality, and invasive species. And finally, the best populations remaining for most of these species are in our pilot area, which consists primarily of the upper Tar Basin. So we hope this program will let us help you to support good aquatic habitat and stewardship and offer benefits for both landowners and aquatic species. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. One question that has come in into the chat is from Paul Dean, and he's wondering, can you generally explain the economic / biological impact if and when a particular species goes extinct?
The economic and biological impact. If and when a species goes extinct. So I might need to look into the economic impact of that, but I could touch on a little bit the biological impact. I think what we have found as a ecological community over the last many years is that protecting biodiversity and the functional integrity of our systems, both terrestrial and aquatic, are really important for maintaining our ecosystems. And so when something goes extinct or we lose the functionality of a suite of species, then it changes the way they work. And I'll speak more to aquatics because that's my most recent framework. One example I can give you, for instance, is the invasive zebra mussel, where it has wiped out a lot of native mussels in other parts of the country. And they may filter a lot of water and they may clean water in a different way, but they filter differently than our native mussels. And so they can actually upset the balance of nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, and they can select against species like cyanobacteria, which can cause harmful algal blooms. And so those do have some economic and some human health impacts for water use and that sort of thing. So I think a primary reason that we focus on species, and that's the current focus, of course, of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, is we have to work through the Endangered Species Act, which is species specific. But we're trying to maintain biodiversity, which supports our ecosystems and our natural resources that our country was built on and we hope to maintain. I hope that answered the question a little bit.
Paul, if you need further, please let us know. We did get a couple questions in that Michael addressed, but I think it's important that we touch base on those. One from Douglas was, which invasive species are problematic for you and how are you addressing their impact? Michael indicated for Carolina mad toms, the invasive flathead catfish is most problematic. And for the mussels, it's likely the Asiatic clams. Although these declines are less clear, their best tool for managing them right now is education and prevention of range expansion. We have some research projects that will focus on impacts of Asian clams coming up in the next few years. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you for Michael for fielding that while I was talking. Yeah, and I would just add on to that some of the recent research that has come out on the Asiatic clams shows that where they co-occur, they can impact the growth of our native mussels. So they're probably competing with the resources there. Yeah, and I would agree with everything that Michael said about the catfish. If you catch them, take them out and eat them, please. We need to have a flathead roundup or something. But yeah, they're problematic.
So Jennifer, it brings up a good question, because a lot of times we talk about education and everything from all aspects and being a part of the university. Is there a place that the U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service makes available their research that people can follow up on and learn more about these invasive species?
That's a great question. So the Fish and Wildlife Service relies often on our academic partners and our state agency partners that do that primary research. And so that research usually ends up in scientific publications or in the agency reports. I will say, though, that the species status assessments, when we conduct one of those for a species, it's also a comprehensive review of the best available scientific information on a species. So from the services perspective, we are able to collate what we know of as the best information that's out there and work with our partners. So that might be one place to go if you're interested in a particular species. But if you are interested in impacts to a taxa or a species, I would encourage you to just reach out too, because it's easy for me to reach directly out to our partners if there's something specific that you're interested in learning about.
All right, thank you. The other question that came in was just what does extirpated mean? And Michael, I think, did a good job answering this, is in that it means the species has gone extinct, and it could be just for a stream, the complete river basin, or maybe even an entire range.
Yes, so thank you. And I apologize for using a jargon term. I usually try to scrub my presentations of jargon. But yeah, I would say it's just disappearance from a particular locale. So that's what we mean when we say extirpated. It's just, we believe that it's lost from a location. It just hasn't been found in long enough with a decent reliance to know that it's there anymore.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. So folks, just a reminder, as you get questions, please enter them into the Q&A feature. You can do that by selecting the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and then entering your questions. Ron, before we move on into the break, is there anything you want to touch on before we go into break?
No, I just want to highlight also what John Ann said is, we are breaking new ground on this project and this partnership. So it's a really unique project. Today's workshop, again, is a kickoff workshop. And we look forward to partnering with any participants on the call today to achieve results on the ground.
All right. So folks, according to the agenda, we will be on a break until 11 o'clock. Please do not close your Zoom window. Just go ahead and take a break, and we will start back up here at 11 a.m. sharp. Thank you. Start up here. Michael, if you'd like to present your presentation. Right now we see it as a PowerPoint, but not in presentation mode.
Give me just a second here. All right, how's that? Do you see it now?
No, you're not sharing your screen at this moment. There we go.
We're good? All right.
Yep.
Okay. So, hey, everybody. I'm Michael Fisk. I am the Eastern Region Coordinator for the Wildlife Resources Commission. And just going to pick up kind of where Jennifer left off. She did an excellent job just explaining, introducing y'all and explaining a lot of the species that we work with in the Upper Tar and the Upper Neuse, and just their status, and want to build on that a little bit. So I work in the Aquatic Wildlife Diversity Group, and we cover, monitor, and conserve all the non-game species. So most folks are more familiar with, sport fish side of things and species that you're going out to fish for. But we work with all the other species. We're concentrating on fish, mussels, crayfish, and snails. And most of our work's conducted, especially with these listed species that Jennifer mentioned. We're doing a lot of snorkel surveys where we're going along and visually surveying them and collecting basic life history information, distributional data, and just anything that can help us better manage and conserve the species. A lot of our job is looking at habitat protection. If we identify good habitat, we try our best to protect that. Managing invasive species, and in the last 5 to 10 years, we've done a lot of augmentation and reintroduction, which I'll talk a little bit more about that. So for a lot of these really rare species, to try to give them a jump start and rebuild the population, we've done a lot of work where we'll go out and collect wild individuals, bring them into our hatcheries and produce offspring, raise those up a couple of years, and then either enhance populations that we already know about, try to build those populations up, or reintroduce the species into areas that it historically occupied but no longer exist there. And so then the pictures, you can just see some of the species that we're talking about here. The Tar River Spiny mussel on the left, in the middle is the yellow lance, and again, Tar River Spiny mussels on the right. And before we reintroduce or stock these mussels, we'll tag them so we know what year they were stocked. And, when we go out and do future surveys, we're able to recapture them and see how much they've grown, see how old they are, and just continue to monitor and see how these stockings are going. So with all the species, they're obviously they're specific in their life history and habitat needs, but there's quite a bit of overlap for the species we're talking about today. They all are fairly sensitive to water quality, and they really focus in and need certain requirements for in the streams that they live in. They prefer and require unobstructive, moderate flows in the rivers, free flowing streams and rivers. They like stable substrates. The substrates can vary from coarse sand to gravel and rock, but they all have to be stable and free of sediment, which we'll talk more about here in a little bit. The water has to be well oxygenated, free of excessive nutrients, which can, excessive nutrients can lead to poor water quality and algal blooms. And they also need stable water temperatures. So obviously water temperature fluctuates through the year, but with some land use practices, it can heat up and it can fluctuate kind of outside the normal range of what these species prefer. So what does good habitat look like for these species? So here's a picture of Fishing Creek up in Halifax County. And if we were going out doing a Tar River Spiny survey, a Carolina Mad Tom survey, this is what we would look for. The creek, there's nice vegetation and cover on each side of the bank. The trees are coming all the way down to the bank and actually hanging over and providing a lot of shade, which keeps the water cool. The water's flowing through there, nice moderate flow, and which ends up creating good habitat down on the bottom. So good stable sand, good stable gravel. So this is really what we want to look for when we're out doing our surveys. So I want to focus. This is like what's optimal here. I want to talk about some of the things that we observe that can kind of chip away at this and impact this good habitat and make it degraded and less desirable for some of these species. So one of the biggest stressors that we see is just increased sedimentation. Increased sedimentation leads to poor water quality, low dissolved oxygen, just from increased nutrients and algal blooms, which can lead to fish kills. A lot of this is caused from improper or even no buffers left around these creeks. You can see in the picture in the top right, this is not North Carolina, but someone has logged all the way down to the stream. There's no buffer there to filter out the sediment and let the water and reduce the runoff there. So all the sedimentation is going into these creeks. And then the picture on the right, bottom right, you can see that there's really no buffer there and a lot of erosion coming down into the creeks as well. So the big deal with sedimentation is that, in these gravel substrates and even in the coarse sand, you get interstitial space. So the space in between the gravel and the cobble is extremely important for all these species. For that space provides habitat for our adult fish and mussels. So you can see here, the Carolina mad tom is underneath a big flat rock. They utilize that kind of habitat throughout the year. And mussel species will utilize, they kind of migrate vertically up and down through the substrate. Sometimes they'll stay down below the substrate and some come up. But this interstitial space is really important for adults. It's also important for spawning habitat. Carolina mad toms get under these flat rocks, as Jennifer was talking about, and will spawn and lay their eggs, and then the juveniles hatch out. And they spend a lot of time up in this interstitial space here, until they mature and get big enough to kind of move out of there. And then with the mussels, the juvenile mussels spend almost their entire time down in the substrate and really don't come up to the top to feed or filter. The really neat thing about this interstitial space and the gravel is that, the water's flowing through here. The water's also flowing through the gravel. So it's bringing dissolved oxygen, it's bringing nutrients for all of the juvenile mussels and fish to feed off of, and they can find refuge in this as they develop. And what happens is that when you get a big sedimentation event, or just over time sedimentation comes in, you can see the drawing here, the brown here is the sedimentation. You still have all your gravel there in these riffles and stuff, but it's all, the interstitial space is all filled in. And so you're losing that adult habitat. So Carolina mad toms end up having to find more marginal habitat somewhere else. If they have laid eggs and they get covered up with silt and sediment, then they will suffocate and die. And so you lose recruitment there. And the same thing with the juvenile mussels is that if they're down in the substrate and they get covered up in sediment and these fine silt and stuff, that they'll suffocate as well. And then kind of a similar impacts to Neuse River water dogs and other salamanders. So the sedimentation really reduces its habitat here and kind of affects multiple life stages for a lot of these species. Another stressor that we see is just improperly installed culverts. As Jennifer was saying, part of the life cycle of a mussel, they attach to fish. So the host fish can carry the fish around for a couple of weeks to a few months. And the mussels, they're not going to move around a whole lot. So their chance to move and repopulate new areas and move upstream and downstream is going to be with the host fish. So with these improperly installed culverts, you get these big drops, you reduce movement from host fish, and therefore you're affecting not just the host fish, but you're also affecting the mussels. And also these culverts can modify habitats downstream by just scouring out habitat below and then increasing flow. So these can have impacts on all these species. Then another common stressor is just chemicals and pollutants. There's a lot of everyday chemicals that we use up on the land that if they get into the water can be extremely toxic to aquatic organisms. These can lead to lethal impacts from fish kills and mussel die-offs, and also sublethal impacts of whether there's a compromise in their immune system, it can impair reproduction and reduce growth, and all of which make the individual just less fit. So they may still be alive, but it's having a population impact as opposed to just an individual impact. And then also going back to the buffers around the streams, not only do the buffers decrease the amount of runoff and sedimentation going into the creeks, but they also help regulate the stream temperature. These species are not cold water species. They're not trout, where trout, if the water temperature gets above 70 degrees, then a lot of times they'll die. But these species are more sensitive than others, in our area, and can have, at the very extreme, lethal impacts, and more commonly sublethal impacts when the temperature gets too hot in the water, because there's no shading over the stream at all. So just kind of rehashing, there's a lot of stressors that can affect the good habitat in the upper Tar and upper Noosh. And all of these, it can be, detrimental to species conservation and recovery, and kind of work against everything that we're trying to do. But the good thing is that, a lot of these stressors can be greatly reduced and even prevented by just actions that you take as a landowner. If you have stream habitat going through your land, just utilizing stream buffers and stream management zones can greatly have great impacts on the aquatic wildlife diversity in the streams, just by benefiting the habitat, which ultimately benefits the species. The other things to do is just avoid crossing the streams if possible, and if you do have to cross them, make sure there's proper stream crossings and culverts installed. And we'll get into a lot of this later today in further presentations. But another thing to do is to just make sure that you follow all the proper application and storage of any chemicals that you have to use on your land. Whether you're spraying herbicides or pesticides or having to store fuel, just making sure that you follow all those rules really helps mitigate any impacts they may have on any aquatic organisms. And so just in general, we know that best management practices help protect, water quality and habitat by reducing all these stressors, whether it's sedimentation, chemical pollution, altering the stream temperatures, and promoting movement of species. But, I think, this program is going to be extremely important, and you kind of take it an extra step to be able to utilize these pre-harvest management plans to identify some of these stressors and help to mitigate those, to where you'll be able to manage your timber as well as protect the aquatic species that are adjacent to your land. So that's all I have for now. If there's any questions, great. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to the moderator.
Thanks, Michael, very much. So one question that came in that Jennifer answered that I think is for us to touch on here is, can the reintroduction of lab-raised mussels allow the species to maintain population levels? And Jennifer responds back, we hope so. Some are at such low levels in the wild that they don't have a good chance to reproduce. Boosting population size and habitats that will support their full life cycles will aid in reproduction and assist in recovery. Some places are seeing success, and Michael can speak to success we're starting to see with the Tar River spiny mussels. Stocked mussels are growing, and he found females with larvae. We called that gravid. Now we need to observe young as evidence of reproduction. It's hard work in the hatchery to support that fish-assisted reproduction, but it's one of our best tools for recovering these species. So Michael, do you want to touch a little bit on the success that you're starting to see with the Tar River spiny mussels?
Well, yeah, I would say, Jennifer, that was an excellent answer. Without utilizing hatcheries and production, with Tar River spiny mussels in particular, we have, in the last 20 years have found, less than 40 individuals, and the remaining mussels that are out there are so spread apart that they're not close enough to reproduce. So without our intervention, being able to collect males and females and put them together in the hatchery to where they could reproduce, you know, there's a very good chance that those species would have just continued to age out, and we would have lost the species. So from that perspective, we've been able to raise and stock over, you know, around 40,000 Tar River spiny mussels and put them in multiple locations in the Tar River or the Tar Basin and a few places in the Neuse Basin. So we've gone from, you know, less than 40 individuals to, you know, thousands upon thousands. So we've really, it's been extremely successful in that respect, in that we've been able to get more mussels out on the landscape and give them a chance to be in the density and populations they need to successfully reproduce on their own. We're kind of, you know, now this has been going on for several years now, and we're, as Jennifer said, we've been able to stock the individuals. We put them out there. We've observed, you know, just survivorship. They live out. They do okay. They grow. They become gravid, and so the next step in just through the life history there is just to see recruitment. So juvenile mussels, and we'll be doing some surveys actually next week, looking into that to see if we can detect any recruitment. So it's been a really good success story, you know, as far as mussel conservation, you know, throughout the whole Southeast.
All right, thanks, Michael. So folks, at this time is a question period. So if you have questions that you would like answered, please make sure to enter them into the Q&A feature. We do have one question that's come in. And Michael, could you explain what does gravid mean?
It's another term. For female mussels, it means that they have fertilized eggs that they're going to release. So the males will release sperm into the water. The females have to filter that out, and it fertilizes the eggs, and then they will release those as glaucidia, which is another term. Just juvenile mussels. Release the juvenile mussels once they've matured inside the female mussel.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions at this time, folks? If not, what we'll do is we'll have Jonathan gear up to give his presentations. If you have questions, remember to type them into the Q&A feature there, and we'll address them as we go along. Next up is Jonathan Murray with the North Carolina Forest Service, and he will be speaking to us today related to eligibility, plans, funding, and administration of the program. So Jonathan, it's all yours.
All right, thank you, Bob. Thank you, Jennifer and Michael, for covering those species of importance for this particular cost share project. We're going to kind of switch gears here a little bit and talk about some of the application process, you know, who's eligible, funding, and administration. So we'll jump right into that. And as Bob said, I am Jonathan Murray, the Forest Stewardship and Forest Legacy Coordinator for the North Carolina Forest Service. As you'll notice, my slides have the part number that corresponds to Handbook. So if you're following along in the Handbook, that's what those numbers coincide with. So first off, eligible landowners is going to be available for all non-industrial privately owned forest land. Any land that's owned by forest industry or government-owned lands will not be eligible. If you have landowners that are participating in federal, state, or private sector financial conservation, technical assistance programs, also including conservation easements, we will cost share those acres as well, so you can include them in the plan and include them in your invoiced amounts. Programs like CRP or Conservation Reserve Program, CREP or Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, And then Tar River Land Conservancy, which is has a foothold in this pilot project area, has conservation easements. So just pay attention if you have those. Make sure you reach out to the folks holding these conservation agreements and make sure that the harvesting that takes place in those areas meets the standards and guidelines for those acreages. As has been stated, there's 7 eligible counties: Granville, Vance, Warren, Franklin, Halifax, and Nash, and Edgecombe. And all of these river basins that are within these counties, we will cost share the acreage for any river basin. So of course, our focus area is the Tar, Pam, and Neuse River basins. But if you have a tract that's located within the Roanoke River Basin in the northern section of this pilot project area, we will also cost share those tracts as well. So if you fall in the 7 county area, you're a non-industrial private landowner, and then you meet these eligible tract conditions, then you'll qualify for the cost share program. So the big thing here is 10 contiguous acres, contiguous being key. We want it to be all in one area, one block. And then we want these to be planned harvest. So either you're currently in the planning phase to have a final harvest or clear cut harvest, or some type of thinning harvest, maybe even a seed tree or shelter wood cut, whatever the case may be. But in that planning phase or looking to harvest within the next 3 years. And also we want to make sure that, following the harvest, that the acreage that the harvest took place on remains in forest land. So we don't want anything that's going to be converted to any other use other than forestry. The eligible plan type for this cost share program, there's only one, being a pre-harvest plan that will qualify for cost share payment. If you have a landowner that has received some sort of cost share assistance for plan preparation services through other programs such as the CAP 106 NRCS program, those tracts will not be eligible for cost share here as well. We don't want to double dip with cost share for plan preparation services. If you've had landowners that have received cost share for individual practices, this will not disqualify your landowner from receiving cost share payments. So if they have participated in programs like FDP, Forest Development Program, Southern Pine Beetle Prevention Program, EQIP, any of those cost share programs that specifically target one or multiple practices, then you're good to go here as well. They can still qualify for reimbursement payments. So eligible plan writers, all of you that are participating today can check that box. You've received the training. So that's one of the requirements, is we want folks to receive this training about the Foresters for Healthy Waters cost share program. We want the plan preparers to be in the natural resource profession. So folks that have a pro logger designation, timber buyers, loggers themselves, natural North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission consulting foresters, and then we do have from time to time the National Wild Turkey Federation has staff that prepares plans as well. The North Carolina Forest Service, as far as our service foresters, county rangers, any of our employees, we're not going to be participating in this 7 county area for pre-harvest plans. So we're going to, leave that to you all to work with your landowners or gain new landowners through this process. And we're just here as more of an administrative side to facilitating funding and things like that. So you don't have to compete with us for land preparation services or anything like that for this project. The program funding, so there's $80,000 that has been allocated through a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service grant. The grant is available for 2 years or until the funding is fully obligated. So I had to take a guess. I don't think we'll make it to 2 years. We'll probably have it fully allocated before then, but just note we do have a 2-year window available. The program administration, we're going to handle the application process through the North Carolina Forest Service Stewardship Incentives Program cost share application. If any of you on the call have recently worked with us through our stewardship incentive program for plan preparation services, tree farm plans or stewardship plans, you're familiar with this cost share application. And for those that are not, I'm going to pull it up real quick so you can see what this looks like. Can everybody still see the cost share application?
So we can see it.
Okay, good. All right. So just kind of wanted to walk you through the application. If anybody has any questions, please let me know and I'll answer those for you. So it's pretty straightforward. The district and county being the North Carolina Forest Service district, there's only 2 districts that you'll have to worry about here. That'll be either District 5 or District 11. If you're not sure, just put in the county name. We'll fill that in for you. Program year will actually be 21 and 22, 2021, 2022. If you can't remember that, again, we can fill that in. Approval number will come as the project is approved. It will receive a approval number. Here you'll enter landowner's name, address information, phone number, at least a phone number. If they're willing to provide an email address, enter that here. Last 4 digits of their social or tax ID number, whichever case applies to your particular landowner. Landowner type can be selected here. And this application is can be filled out electronically and submitted electronically as well, or you're welcome to print it off and fill it out by hand and mail it in to us as well. The consultant name, so this will actually be the plan writer. You may or may not be a consulting forester, but your name and company name here, a good contact number for you. The track name, Latin long, we use the degrees decimal minutes. So if you would just put it in that format. If you have another format that you normally use, there's lots of different conversion tools, free conversion tools online that you can convert it to that degrees decimal format. The practice here will be pre-harvest plan. There's only one. You will enter the acres requested, the rate, which we'll cover here in just a second, will be entered here as far as how much cost share will be, or the maximum amount that will be paid for cost share rate here, and then just bring these numbers down for totals. The performance report section will be completed after the plan is written and everything is submitted to the North Carolina Forest Service, so you don't have to worry about filling this out. North Carolina Forest Service will complete that section. The signatures, I've actually done this as a demonstration to show that these applications can be signed electronically, and it'll digitally stamp them with a date and time. So you're more than welcome to have your landowners sign them electronically, or like I said, print it out and have them sign it by hand and mail it in to us. So that's the application. Go back to my presentation. Does anybody have any questions about the application? All right, hearing none, I'll move on. So the cost share rates that I just mentioned are listed here. So basically you have a an acreage range, and wherever your harvest area acreage range falls, you have a corresponding dollar amount associated with that for cost share payment. And we are including the total acres. So if you have any SMZ or stream buffer acreage, you can count that within your plan acres and count towards your cost share payment. The thing to keep in mind about any cost share payments that we typically administer as the North Carolina Forest Service is that we will pay the lesser of the cost share rate or the invoiced amount. So if you have, for instance, an invoiced amount for a 15-acre plan, the cost share rate $750 and you invoice $800, we're going to pay you $750 for that particular plan. And then if you charge $700 for the same 15-acre tract, we would charge you, or we would pay you $700 in cost share payment. So, all right. As far as the local administration, as I mentioned, there's 2 districts that are involved here. The majority of the counties are in District 5, which is the Rocky Mount office, Edgecombe, Franklin, Halifax, Nash, and Warren. And then 2 counties within District 11, Granville and Vance, and their district office contact numbers are listed here. So please contact those folks at the local level for questions. They will be the ones handling the cost share applications and sending those in for cost share approval. And as John Ann stated, we will start receiving applications for this program on July 1st of this year, and the funding will be made on a first come, first served basis until the funds are fully allocated. So with most cost share programs, there are deadlines associated with them. We still use the same process here with approval letters. So as you submit these applications, landowners will receive a cost share approval letter stating the amount of cost share set aside for their particular plan preparation services. And it'll have a time frame on there, a deadline, 4 months from the date of funding to have the plan completed. What you'll need to submit for reimbursement payment will be a copy of the pre-harvest plan and the maps that go along with it, and we'll cover some information about what needs to be in the plan and mapping and things like that a little bit later. Paid invoice, paid being key, so we want to make sure that you all receive payment from your landowner for the services that you provided up front, and then we provide a reimbursement payment to the landowner. The NC substitute W-9 form. So if any of you have worked with any cost share programs through the North Carolina Forest Service over the last 3 to 4 years, you're probably familiar with this substitute W-9 form. It was recently updated last year, so just make sure that you're using the most current form. And if you need assistance with that, the district office that you'll be working with can help you. You could also find it on our North Carolina Forest Service website. The most current one is posted there. And these need to be completed hard copy, original signatures, no electronic or digital signatures for these W-9 forms. And that's all I have. If there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Folks, if you get questions, please enter them into the Q&A feature. One question that did come in was, what happens if, so if the plan is written and everything's set up, ready to go, approved, all that type of stuff, and then the logger doesn't follow the plan, what happens?
So in other words, you plan to have it harvested and the harvest never takes place.
Or the harvesting takes place, but the logger doesn't follow the pre-harvest plan.
Oh, don't think there's any penalty there. I mean, we want to make sure that they follow the plan. That's the whole purpose, is planning and execution here. So if we have a solid plan in place, we want to make sure that they're following the plan, and that would be part of the person that's handling or administrating the harvest, as their role is to be there on site, making sure that they're doing, logging inspections throughout, making sure that stream buffers are being followed as they've been marked or flagged on the ground, and they're using the deck locations that were talked about ahead of the harvesting taking place. Skid, same thing with skid trails and anything that's involved with the harvesting operation, and even things like what road to use for ingress and egress for logging trucks. So that's really the goal, is where we want to put a solid plan in place and execute the plan. So hopefully that does not happen.
So a follow-up to that is also, will the North Carolina Forest Service insist that loggers follow the plan to the utmost, or will loggers be able to make changes?
Ron, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take that. Ideally, we'd like to have a plan in place on the front end, but we also know that forest planning can be flexible. Sometimes changes do occur depending on locations. So, we would hope that if there are changes, that maybe it's just amended or an updated map, and that's shared with the landowner, or any of the proposed changes are shared with the consultant and the landowner. So ultimately, we're paying for the plan to put in place, and we'd like for them to implement it and follow it, but we also understand on an operational basis, some things need to change. But the ultimate goal is that protective measures are outlined and followed, and FPGs are in compliance. So as long as they're in compliance with all state and federal laws and the FPGs, that's ultimately what matters most.
So next question is from Mike Ballinger. He's wondering, can you elaborate on what qualifies as timber company land?
So it would be any land owned by forest industry. So if you've got a mill, for instance, that owns company land, then those folks would not qualify. Forest industry owned land is.
Does that include things like TIMOs and REITs?
PMOs are considered private, Bob, and we've worked with them in the past as well. So
Okay. Thank you. Let's see. A question from Paul Dean was, does a landowner still qualify if it stands to be harvested on the tract, even if the harvest area has no streams or is not bordering, in this case, the Tar River?
Yes, even if you don't have any streams and it falls within those counties and meets those non-industrial private landowner and those tract eligibility requirements, then yes, you can still qualify. All
right. And then Jennifer points out a good point there that, the fact that the 7-county area, if the land falls in that qualifies, but also the land's in the watershed. And that's the important factor here, is that we're doing good practices to protect the watershed. Don't have to be just next to a stream to do that.
Yep.
Hey, Bob, can I contribute?
Sure.
The questions about concerns about whether the logger follows the plan, it's so much easier to be upfront than after the fact. So I put in a comment here just to encourage you to have real good upfront communication with your logger, so there's not a misunderstanding, and check in with them regularly. And this is a pilot project, so we'll be following up to see how it goes and how effective it is. And if we discover that these plans can't be followed, well, we'll have learned a lesson about about not spending money to do this. But we're very confident that they can be followed, and we're putting a lot of trust in you all as the plan writers, as foresters and professionals, to not just put it on paper, but to communicate it with the loggers and stick with it. So we really appreciate that.
So that brings up another question that comes in is about timing is critical, right? And so they were wondering, would it be possible to have input from well, they like to have input from loggers when preparing plans. Can the turnaround time be a week?
Be a week.
I think, in other words, prior to harvest, right? If they're meeting with for example, if correct us if we're not getting this right, if you want to retype your question so we understand it. But I'm thinking a week time frame. In other words, they meet with the logger a week before the harvest is to take place, type thing. And so they'd be able to write the plan and get it submitted, and then you have a week before the harvest.
Yeah, I think the main thing is it just making us aware ahead of the harvest before anything takes place. Prior notification is the main thing there.
Okay. And then question came in the chat from David Halley, who's wondering who gets paid for the plan, the landowner or the consultant?
The landowner. So the landowner is the one that's applying for the cost share, and then we're providing a reimbursement payment to the landowner. So the landowner would be paying the plan writer upfront for their invoiced amount, and then we provide a reimbursement payment on the back.
And that's important for the landowner to realize they have to turn in that invoice showing that it's been paid to the consultant.
Yes. Sometimes consultants will actually send us copies themselves, and that's perfectly fine. But as long as we get a copy of a paid invoice from either the landowner or consultant, then we're good to go.
All right. I do not see any more questions at this time. We are a little bit ahead of schedule. Ron, how do you want to proceed with this? We were supposed to take a break at noon for lunch, but it's 11:45. Do we want to move on? Jonathan, do you want to cover the next part, the required plan elements, and then we break for lunch?
Yeah, I can do that. I think it's about 10 minutes, so I can cover that right before lunch.
That work for you, Ron?
Yes.
All right,
Yep.
let's do that then.
All right, 1 second. All right. So I was planning this to take place after lunch, but anyway, we'll jump right in again. The basic plan and map elements. I'm going to cover those. So the basic plan elements here are typically within any type of forest management plan, but I just want to make sure everybody is clear on what we're looking for. So landowner's name and contact information. So their, address, phone numbers, emails, things like that, name, landowner's name, plan writers, you all's contact information, include any professional certifications. So if you're a registered forester, wildlife biologist, you went through the pro logger. If you're an actual timber buyer or logger that's on the call, does not have any other designation, whatever you have, professional certifications, just list those. Landowner's objectives for the harvest. So is it going to be a clear cut harvest, thinning, shelter wood, seed tree? What type of harvest are we talking about? And what are the goals for the landowner for having this harvest completed? Describe a current condition of the harvest area. We're not looking for you to provide a cruise report or anything like that here. Some general stand conditions as far as what's currently there, as far as species. Is it a mature stand, immature stand? Those types of things will be fine. We're not looking for a lot of in-depth information here. The desired outcome. So especially if it's a thinning operation, what kind of basal area are we talking about going down to, or trees per acre? How many are going to be left following the harvest? And if it's a clear cut situation, is it going to be natural regeneration or artificial regeneration with tree planting taking place? We're not asking you to provide a regeneration plan within this, just a general idea about what is desired following the harvest. In this picture here on the right, I just kind of wanted to talk about this for a second. So sometimes when we're out looking at tracks before we're having a timber sale or a logger start on the property, we run across these types of situations like the top photo, a dry stream bed, which is probably prevalent right now because we're in a pretty dry situation. If you run across this, you may not be sure if it's an ephemeral or intermittent stream. So we as the Forest Service have water quality foresters on staff, and Brian Michelson, who's on the call today and services this this area for this pilot project. He can make stream determinations, as well as some of our service foresters and assistant district foresters that have received the Division of Water Resources training to make stream determinations. So we can meet you on site, take a look at these and let you know where those breakpoints are from ephemeral to intermittent or intermittent to perennial. It's pretty important because as you can see that on that bottom photo, depending on the time of the year that you're out there, it may be a little tricky to determine one from the other. So just know that we are available to provide that service for you all. So again, planning and execution is really important, and that's really the goal here is to provide a solid plan, meet with your landowner, loggers on site, talk about all the different things that come along with a harvesting operation as far as haul roads, deck locations, if you're in a thinning situation, where your main corridors are going to be laid out, or if you're in a clear cut situation, where you want to locate your skid trails. And of course, if you have to cross a stream, where's the best place to have a stream crossing. So just make sure you're talking to all the folks involved, everybody's on the same page, and hopefully we have good results following the planning and after the harvest is executed. So the required map features, you can include as many of these as you possibly can on one map. When I was preparing this, I actually walked down through, making a map and seeing how many of these I could fit on one. The first three that are listed here, I could get all on one map. But if I put in the topography or contour lines, it kind of covered other things up. So I was only able to get away with 2 maps. So if you're more skilled and you can get away with one, you're more than welcome to. And if you need to do more than that, that's perfectly fine. We just want to make sure we're getting all these map features on a map. So the first one here is a harvest boundary. So we want that harvest boundary digitized over aerial photo, and then include the acres of the harvest on that map. Within that harvest boundary, distinguish between intermittent and perennial streams. You can use your soils maps and topo maps to find the location of some of those, but it's probably a good idea to go out and actually take a look at what the map is showing you on the ground and make sure that what's mapped is actually what you're finding on the ground. There are times where intermittent streams are mapped and they're actually ephemeral, or the stream is mapped showing it extends further than it actually does. So ground truthing these things is pretty important. A soils map within the harvest boundary, any soils map reference is fine here for this map, in particular map. But when we're talking about riparian buffer rules, just keep in mind you've got to use the most recently published printed county soil survey if they have one. I know Warren County does not have one, so they don't have one. You just got to fall back to the topography map for those buffer rule areas for the tar, pam, and noose. And then we want to have the contour lines. And again, any source for this particular map is fine. But if we're talking about riparian buffer rules, Make sure you're using that USGS 7.5 minute topo, the most recently published version. And all of these map features can be included on a map within our North Carolina Forest Service pre-harvest planning tool. Again, you can find that on our website. If you go into the homepage and click on the Programs and Services tab at the top and then go to Water Quality, you can find the pre-harvest planning tool on our website there. And you should be able to produce a map with no problem with all these features. And just to show you kind of what I was talking about with, combining multiple features into one map. So I've got everything here other than my topo. So it can definitely be done. And again, just make sure you have your intermittent and perennial streams differentiated on your maps. And that's all I have for that. If there's any questions. Ron, I can see you got
We
your
do
hand.
have a couple questions that have come in, Jonathan. One is if you'll go back to the slide where you showed the two streams, had a picture of a stream without water and a picture of the dry stream bed versus the one with water.
Yes.
I think it'll be, oh, there you go. So the question is, what stream class was the stream in the before and after photo? I think, this pre versus post harvest. Do you know what
So-
stream class that is?
So without being on the ground and actually doing a stream determination and storing this, I wouldn't be able to tell you. But I just wanted to use this as a representation of what you can find, what you find sometimes when you're out there, marking your stream buffer, and then the logger starts and the thing's completely full, like the bottom photo. So this is more just a FYI sort of thing. As far as the actual designations here, this is not a photo that I took. I just found it on the website, so I haven't actually visited the track and walked the stream bed, so I couldn't tell you what the stream classification is here.
All right, thanks, Jonathan. The next question is from Chris Smith, and if as an RF I offer, sorry, I think somebody answered it by typing, but if as an RF I offer a la carte pre-harvest planning to a landowner for a fee, which includes application and award of cost share, but the landowner does not wish to hire me for any further forestry services, but decides a do-it-yourself approach thereafter, including having the harvest conducted, is there a responsibility or liability to me as the plan writer, since I'm not going to oversee the harvest?
I would say, sorry.
So just so you know, Tom has answered, no, there's no intent to imply liability for complying with the plan's recommendations. The purpose of this project is to encourage thorough planning. We will not be examining plans to examine if they are followed, but we will conduct our regular FPG inspections.
Yeah.
What I wanted to add as well, Bob, is, the plan writer's role is to do their due diligence and inform the landowner. But, if a harvest is conducted and it's not in compliance, typically the landowner is still, property owner is still responsible. But we tend to work with the logger and the timber buyer if there's any problems that need correction on site. So I would say if the landowner chooses a different consultant and the consultant is responsible for overseeing the forest operation or working with the logger, then typically we would work with them.
Okay. Next question is from Dave Halley, who was wondering, does the North Carolina Forest Service pre-harvest tool provide topographic lines?
Yes, it's a map feature that you can, there's a drop-down menu in the top right-hand corner of that pre-harvest planning tool, and you can change the, different aerial photography, contour lines, road maps. There's a lot of different choices there, but yes, the USGS is one of the choices.
Okay, and Tom did follow up with that, saying that he'll be demonstrating that after lunch, and we'll point out those features. So
Okay.
Ron, unless there's other questions or comments, we're right up at the lunch hour here. So go ahead.
Yep, I did have just a couple points for clarification. Questions are great. Involves discussion, but I want to talk to about, I think the question was if the logger was going to be logging within a week, the turnaround time. Typically with any of our cost share programs, they require approval of the application. So, you know, no work can begin until you receive the approval letter. Certainly we can work with entities if they want a fax or they're trying to get funding and they can prepare their plan, but we would want the plan approved. We want the plan prepared, reviewed, and approved by one of our foresters prior to the harvest operation. So if that's occurring within a 1 week time period, it's probably too close to get that project, you know, approved, reviewed, and signed off on before the harvest. So again, planning ahead of time, we want to allow enough time prior to any operation, so we have a good plan in place and it's going to be followed.
All right, any other comments from any of our presenters so far this morning?
The other thing, Bob, when we were having discussions about the flexibility of the plan, if a plan has been written, typically with any of our cost share programs and the practice or the recommended changes, we typically ask for a amendment. So amendment could be an updated map that goes with the plan, or if there's other precautions that are needed because of where some skid trails were located or a crossing, we certainly would want at least some narrative to support protective measures if they're weren't previously addressed in the original plan. So again, they can be modified. We need to be flexible with the harvest operations, but we want that discussion to happen prior to being implemented. And then if there's a new plan that's recommended, outline that and send us an amendment to the plan so we can have it for long-term and for the documentation of the project file.
All right, and somebody did just ask the question that said, basically they said that I assume an approved plan can be modified. And then he answered, looks like you're answering this, Ron. So yes, plans can be modified. You just need to coordinate with North Carolina Forest Service and make sure they get an amendment.
Yeah.
Yep, okay. All right, everybody, it's 12 noon. We are going to take a break. It's important, please do not close your Zoom window or the webinar portal, especially if you're going for continuing education credits. We will be coming back to this here. Ron, we're about 10 minutes ahead of schedule. How do you want to handle that? Do you want to give them an extra 10 minutes at lunch and start back up at 12:50, or do you want to start back up at 12:40 and just everything moves forward 10 minutes? You're muted, Ron. Ron, you were muted.
Let's just stay on the original schedule, Bob, and if we finish early, that's great. So we'll just keep it the way the agenda is.
Okay, so folks, we'll be back at 12:40. See you then. Enjoy your lunch. Give you another minute here to join us. But as you do, remember, as you join us, remember that we are taking questions and answers. Use the Q&A feature. You guys have been doing great so far with that. Also remember that posted a couple different times in the chat window there, the link to the portal where this webinar is listed. And in that you will find copies of presentations, the handbook, as well as a couple other handouts that have been made available. Those will always be available there at that web portal for you and everything. So you can always come back to it later to get those. It is 12:40. We're supposed to start back up, and we've already covered a little bit of this afternoon session with Jonathan wrapping up the information on required plan elements. We're now going to continue with that, but we will be moving into different portions of the handbook, part 7C through D, as well as a couple other things there. And Jennifer is going to cover that for us. And Jennifer, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my whole screen because I'd like to pop out of this presentation to the web for a couple of demos. And I should be in presentation mode now. So thanks, welcome back everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. And we're going to be moving through the handbook again, like Bob said. And I'm going to be talking about the aquatic species review, required plan elements, and some helpful tools to help you figure out how to fill out that portion. And I did forget to introduce myself formally in my morning session. So I am an aquatic species recovery biologist at the Raleigh Fish and Wildlife Service office and the national recovery lead for most of the species that we're talking about today. And so I'm really interested in partnering with you and landowners in this area. So the objectives of this conversation are to give an overview of the required plan elements of critical habitat and aquatic species presence, review some recommended resources. These are all covered in the Foresters for Healthy Waters Plan book, including the Fish and Wildlife Service Critical Habitat Mapper, the Information for Planning and Consultation website, or IPAC, the North Carolina Natural Heritage Data Explorer, and the North Carolina Forest Service's pre-harvest planning tool. And I'll also touch on Appendix B in your handbook, which talks about Endangered Species Act goals and protections, and some newer 4D rules for threatened species as they apply to forestry. And we'll talk about what those are. I just hit my 1-year anniversary last week. So this time last year, I was learning what a 4D rule was with myself with Fish and Wildlife Service. Okay, required plan elements. We are in handbook part 7C for aquatic species and critical habitat review. For the aquatic species review, this is part 7C, number 1. We ask that you identify any federally threatened, endangered, or at-risk species that occur on the tract or in close proximity. We consider close proximity 1 or 2 miles, and we have that guidance because most of the recommended tools that we're going to ask you to use have a built-in default buffer of 1 or 2 miles. And so either is fine. We'd like you to provide documentation of the resources you used to make the determination about what species were on there, even if no federal species were found. So that goes back to the question, like, what if you don't have any streams? Or what if you're not within 1 or 2 miles? So most of these will produce an automated report. And if there are 5 species, great, you can print it out. If there are no species, you can print that out and also just append it to your application. And I'll give you several options for helpful tools for aquatic species that I just mentioned in the objectives. For the designated critical habitat review, this is section 7C, number 2. We ask you to find, is your project upon, adjacent to, or nearby critical habitat? And it would be useful to include if your project is directly upstream, say approximately a mile or so. That's where we might expect potential impacts from things like sedimentation. And we'll ask you to use the critical habitat mapper from the Fish and Wildlife Service. You also can identify critical habitat using IPAC, but it's a little less interactive for that portion. So just a reminder from this morning that designated critical habitat is habitat that contains features essential to the conservation of a species and which may require special management and protection. And recall that this is a term that's specific to the Endangered Species Act, and it just delineates specific habitat areas that are needed for recovery. And also just a reminder that it has not been designated for all species. So that's why we have both the critical habitat review and the aquatic species review. And that species may and do occur outside these critical habitat areas for various reasons. So let's get into some of the helpful tools for helping you fill out this portion of the plan. I'm going to cover the critical habitat mapper first, since that's the main one that we're asking for reviewing critical habitat. This is an online mapper. It's really easy to access and use on the Fish and Wildlife Service website. It also has shape files available for GIS. So if you like to work in GIS and that's where you are accustomed to doing your forest planning, you can download this if you choose. But on the online mapper, you can just enter an address or zoom into a location, click on any critical habitat to see what species that habitat is for, and you can also print the map. So I'm going to walk you through some screenshots, and then I'm going to pop out and do a little bit of a demo, just to give a moment for all of this to sink in, because we're covering a lot of information. So for this tool, you'll navigate to ecos.fws.gov. That is our environmental conservation online system, where we house a lot of publicly available information about our work. And you'll see in the bullets at the top, one of those is critical habitat report. You can choose that, and that'll bring you to this page. And when you get here, there are a couple options to download zip files if you like to work in GIS, but you can simply just choose the online mapper. I use this for reference all the time. When you choose that, this brings up this interactive ArcGIS map, and you can zoom in using those plus minus buttons. It'll always be zoomed out to the full extent of the US and territories. And you can also use the find the address or place in the upper right-hand corner of this tool. I used Medoc Mountain State Park, which is in our Foresters for Healthy Waters area, but is publicly owned, so I'm not zooming into anybody's personal private property. You can click on a line or a polygon, depending on what it's for. All of our aquatic species will be shown as lines. And you'll see that it'll tell you a little bit about that critical habitat. This is for the Carolina Mad Tom, what's showing, and it's pink because it's proposed. Next week, that line will change to red because it'll be finalized. It tells you the species, and you'll also notice in the top left of that box is a 1 of 2. And on the right-hand side is a triangle, or kind of like a play button. That means there are 2 critical habitats in the area you clicked on, and you can click that arrow button to show you the next one. And you can also print right from this screen. So I'm gonna hop out of the presentation for just a moment and just demo that quick. So you go to ecos.fws.gov. I've typed that in a bunch. While I'm here, the next thing I'm going to cover is IPAC, and I just wanted to show you can also get there from here. But we're going to go to the critical habitat report right up here at the top. And we're going to choose the online mapper. And so here it shows you the full extent. And I'm just going to use the find an address or place. So you could enter your property address, or you could zoom down to county and then navigate around or whatever. I'm going to use Medoc Mountain State Park. And it brings me right here. And you can see if I just click on that, I clicked on the upper portion. This shows me this is critical habitat for Atlantic pigtoe. It has the name and the scientific name, some additional information, and then also its listing status as proposed threatened. So I'm going to go down here on the map where I was on the screenshots, and you can see here critical habitat for Mad Tom. And I can click that arrow, and then it'll show me that also in that location is critical habitat for Atlantic pigtoe. Then you can simply choose print. The map with the legend is the same legend you can see on the screen right now. It's not super helpful. So you can print it with or without the legend. And it has been taking my map a minute or so to load when I've been practicing this, but I'll just point out that there is a scale bar on there as well. So you could print this out and just make sure your tract is noticeable on this. So you could save it as a PDF and put a red box on it or something like that. And I'll show you also how you can find this on IPAC. Okay, so I'm going to pop back over to my presentation now and re-enter the slideshow. So hopefully you're seeing that and it's caught up with me. So next we're going to cover IPAC. This is the Fish and Wildlife Service's information for planning and consultation webpage. This one, you go to ecos.fws.gov/IPAC, or like I showed you before, you can stop before the slash and you'll still find IPAC right on the left side. Again, this is very easy to access and use online. You can enter your location and project area, and by the end, you'll receive a report of nearby species. On the beginning of this page, there are two options. One is get started and the other is login. People who need to log in tend to be those who need an official species list for consultation. For instance, say they're getting some other federal permit and they need project formally reviewed by the Fish and Wildlife Service. That's who tends to use the login feature. You can just use get started. And at the end of that process, you'll end up, this is a screenshot of the top of a page of the report, and it'll show you how many endangered species and critical habitats and some other relevant information to either the Wildlife Service or other federal regulations like wetlands. So once again, you go to that page and you choose get started. And the first thing you can do is find an address or place. You can zoom or enter in an address. You can also use a shapefile. Next, it'll ask you to define your area. So you can use the sketch or polygon tools for a tract. You can also drag a shapefile right onto the map if you like to work with those. And then once you have your area defined, you can modify it if needed and then confirm, and it'll bring up that report that I showed you. So I'm going to pop back out and go to that page. So again, I'm going to go to ecos.fws.gov/IPAC. The one thing I wanted to show you didn't happen. There's a pop-up that I wanted to alert you about. Maybe my computer has remembered it. There it is. Okay, so I don't want this to be a roadblock, but I wanted to alert everyone that IPAC has had an update, and this applies really to the people who need to use the login. So if they already have a login account or need to create a login account, but you can just simply close this out and then choose get started. This is just another pop-up that's going to tell you you can use this, but if you need an official species list, log in, okay. And then I'm going to choose Medoc Mountain State Park again as our pretend area. And I'm going to do a pretend tract using the polygon. The sketch tool works similarly. You just have to hold down the mouse button the whole time and have a steady hand. So I'm using the polygon here, and I'm just going to use these roads and the stream to trace my pretend tract. When you're done, you can double click or you can just drag your mouse over to finished drawing. And then it's going to ask you to confirm. So if you need to tweak your line a little bit, you can grab these and move them around. And when you're satisfied with your tract, you can simply hit continue. So this brings you to the report. It also shows you what your local office is for the tract you entered. So this is the Raleigh Ecological Services Field Office where John Ann and I work. Shows you a little thumbnail of the tract you entered. And you have 5 endangered species and 1 critical habitat. There's also some information about migratory birds and wetlands that you may find useful. So you have a list of each of these animals that occur on or near the tract or in the area of influence. And here you will see it does show you critical habitat on there. You have to click to see any map. When you click on the map, it is zoomed out to the entire species critical habitat area, but you can see your tract in context with this if you like. Once you're done, you can choose print resource list. Again, it's going to give you a pop-up alerting you that if you need an official species list, you need to log in. You're just going to choose I'm printing this page for other purposes. And then it's going to give you this nice list that you can save as a PDF and append to your report. So I'm going to close that out and go back to our presentation. And next I'll cover the Natural Heritage Data Explorer. This is a tool offered by the North Carolina Natural Heritage Program. It's another interactive web tool. And it's going to also produce an automated project report for you. This, as was mentioned at the beginning of our workshop today, the Natural Heritage Program has offered 1-year access for Foresters for Healthy Waters participants. If you're interested and you're going to be working in North Carolina. And I think Bob was going to give a poll at some point so we could make sure we know who would like to be involved in receiving that complimentary access. They'll also offer training. And so this 1-year access is a $600 value. And so we really want to thank the North Carolina Natural Heritage Program for offering that. So at the bottom of this screen is a shot of their homepage. And I'm just going to walk this through on the slides. I won't be popping out for this or the next one. These web addresses are in your handbook, by the way, so you don't have to remember them all. But this one starts at ncandhde.natureserve.org. And you do have to have a login for this. So you can either create an account or use an existing account if you have one and log in there on the right side of the home screen. And then you want to choose map on the upper left of the screens. Then you can zoom in to find your address or place. You want to zoom in before you create a project. If you don't, the system will remind you to zoom in. And then you can choose create project. So I've used Medoc Mountain State Park again to draw a pretend tract to the find location. And then I was able to use a similar draw tool to draw my tract in. You also can upload a shape file and there are some options there. And then when you're ready, you click accept. And that'll bring this create project form up. So it will want you to name your project and then requires you to choose a project type, and forest or land management is one of those project types. And then most of the rest of this form is making sure your contact information is correct. And it'll pull that from when you register, but you especially want to make sure your email is correct. Once you hit submit on that, you'll get a confirmation that you submitted this project for review, and it'll automate a report to tell you which threatened and endangered species are near your area. It'll also tell you about state listed species and some other information. So that takes a few minutes and you'll get an email when it's ready. And you can also find it, this is where you'll go to find it, is your My Projects tab. So under here, you see that I have a project where I hit demo. And so my project report can be found in there. So you simply click on that and there'll be a PDF of your report that you can print out and append to your plan. The last tool I'm going to cover is the North Carolina Forest Service's pre-harvest planning tool. Again, this website is listed in your handbook. It starts at the ncforestservice.gov on their water quality section. And this is another free online web application. And there's a detailed 69-page handbook available for you to use. And this is an integrated suite of data sets that helps you plan harvest from start to finish. And I'm sure many of you are more familiar than I with this tool. It's really a powerful tool. And I'm just going to cover making sure you know how to get to the aquatic species information. So this is just a screenshot of the front page of where you find the pre-harvest planning tool. You do need to create an account for access. And once you've created an account, you'll get an email confirmation from the North Carolina Forest Service's pre-harvest planning tool. Once you've registered, you'll see this success that your account was registered. And you may have to wait for an administrator to activate your account. So if you can't use it right away, wait for a little while, and a little bit of pre-planning is good. I think it took a couple hours for mine to be active for me to go through it. So just be aware of that. Once you're able to use your account, you can create or edit a tract. So you can hop in and out. You don't have to do all your work at once. Find your location, and you can select your location by parcels. So to find my location, there's a few options. I used the address option, again, navigated to Medoc Mountain State Park. And then, like I said, in this tool, you're going to use parcels to select your tract rather than drawing it. So here you can see the green outlined tract is one I've already selected. And if you mistakenly added one, you can exit out and take it off. The yellow one is one that I've clicked on and I can add it to selected. And so you keep doing that until you have all the parcels in your tract. And then at the bottom, you can create your tract from selected parcels. So like I mentioned, there's lots of things you can do to plan your harvest here. Tom can speak a lot more to that than I can. But in the reports section, you can ask it to generate reports. And this is where you'll find information about aquatic species. So once you ask it to generate reports, that might take a little while, a few minutes to do. You'll get an email when they're ready. And then when they are ready, there's a few options, and you can go to the View Site Summary report, and that will have the information about protected species. So in summary, we covered a multitude of resources from the Critical Habitat Mapper and IPAC on the Fish and Wildlife Service web pages to North Carolina's Natural Heritage Data Explorer and the North Carolina Pre-Harvest Planning Tool. So this last section is related, but not part of the required plan elements. It's related to the Endangered Species Act Goals and Protections and Appendix B of the Handbook, which talks about 4D rules for threatened species. Some of these are new and they have some forestry exceptions. And so I wanted to be sure to cover those a little bit because a couple are coming out next week. Okay. The Endangered Species Act goal is to provide for the conservation of endangered and threatened species of fish, wildlife, and plants. Among the authority in the Endangered Species Act is to provide some prohibitions, things that shouldn't be done for these threatened and endangered species. And there's a whole list of those: importing, exporting, sale, transportation, that sort of thing. One of the most common ones, though, is take, and that can be willful take, like wound, shoot, kill animals. It could be incidental take, which means something that happens incidental to and not the purpose of carrying out an otherwise lawful activity. So you're not intending to harm a species, but something happens and it, something bad happens. This can also include impacts to critical habitat or where the species occurs that cause harm. So, a big slug of sedimentation could be an incidental take that it could kill animals, or it could just disrupt their reproduction during a critical time and cause decline. So all the protections apply where any species occurs. So not just in critical habitat, but anywhere there's an occurrence of that species. And a permit is typically required if an activity may result in a taking. So that's where that conservation and planning consultation comes in a lot, is to help people be aware of that and plan for activities that may result in a taking. So 4D rules for threatened species. They're so named just because it refers to Section 4D of the Act. Like I mentioned, I'm pretty new to the service and I was learning all of this last year. Section 4 of the Act just deals with threatened and endangered determinations. So is a species threatened or is it endangered? And Section 4D allows for species-specific rules that are tailored to the conservation needs. So this can specify, this is for threatened species. The 4D can specify any of the prohibitions that always apply to endangered species. And it may include exceptions to that prohibition of incidental take. If the activities listed in the rule are done as specified, then there's no need for a take permit. And so examples of things that have been included as exceptions are things like species conservation efforts. So like Michael was talking about, taking animals out of the wild into a hatchery. If an animal dies in the hatchery, they're trying to do better for the species. So that's covered. Stream restoration, and now some forestry activities have been included. So why would we make exceptions for these? these things. And the reason is because we expect them to have a net conservation benefit for species, right? I think we all know that well-managed forest lands are good for wildlife. And so that's why some 4D rules have included exceptions now for forestry activities. So just a reminder of the listed species in the Foresters for Healthy Waters area, this seven county pilot program. We have some endangered species. That's Tar River Spiny Mussel, Dwarf Wedge Mussel, and next week, Carolina Mad Tom. All the prohibitions apply, and take is prohibited without a permit for these species. The yellow lance is a threatened species where all prohibitions apply and there are no exceptions written in. And so take is prohibited without a permit. And this is the way most of our earlier listed threatened species are. They referred to this as a blanket 4D rule. So essentially they had the same protections as endangered species. Now we're coming online with more of these threatened listings that have the 4D rules in them, so specific exceptions. And in this area, the Neuse River water dog and the Atlantic pigtoe were both proposed threatened with specific 4D exceptions. So all the prohibitions apply, but there are some exceptions for incidental take. And what's important for you all to know is that there are forestry activities, forestry related activities that follow specified conditions are accepted. So you don't have to worry about permits as long as you're doing what's specified in the rule, and you'll find that they're very familiar. So for any, actually, avoiding take is really easy with good use of forestry BMPs. Most of what everybody is already doing is very helpful for protecting aquatic species habitat. So I didn't want to get down in the weeds of all the details, but I'm happy to answer questions or talk one-on-one, or you're welcome to contact me later for specifics or to help, let me help you point you to the resources. But a couple points I wanted to make about the forestry 4D exceptions in this area for Neuse River water dog and Atlantic pigtoe coming up is that they provide some clarity on those species conservation needs. So what do they need? And we talked about that, you know, they need clean stream bottom and good flow and that sort of thing. We developed these with forestry stakeholder involvement. So we talked very closely over the last few years, and I was just involved this last year in finalizing the rule. These are outcome-based and they're specific but not prescriptive. So that's what we were going for. These rules are conveniently the very same language, so they overlap and they're the same. And the specified conditions you will find align with the forest practice guidelines. So these are very familiar things like prevent sedimentation, establish an SMZ, things like that. So while not the same, this Foresters for Healthy Waters program is a really good guide to put folks on the right track. Okay, just to summarize, the first half we covered required plan elements of critical habitat and aquatic species and the useful resources to help you fill out that part of your plan, including the critical habitat mapper, IPAC, the Natural Heritage Data Explorer, and the Forest Pre-Harvest Planning Tool. And some Endangered Species Act considerations we just talked about were that species with different listing status can overlap. And so awareness is key. And that's really what we're trying to get at with these plans. Some of these rules now have forestry exceptions. And those conditions that are specified are going to be very familiar to you, and they will help with all species in this area. So really good forest management is beneficial for aquatic species and habitat stewardship. And we hope that the Foresters for Healthy Waters guidance and cost share should benefit both landowners and help protect species. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Let's see. Looks like we have a comment from David Halley. It would be nice if the North Carolina Forest Service pre-harvest tool included critical habitat.
Ooh, does it? I don't know if it does.
I don't know. Ron or Jonathan, do you guys have any, or Tom, any idea or want to respond to that?
I don't think it does, but it may require some additional programming. So certainly we can look into it to add to the functionality. But as Jennifer mentioned, there's other tools and resources to get at the same thing, but we'll certainly take that feedback today's meeting and see what can be done, if any.
All the critical habitat shape files are publicly available. So there is an easy way for us to share with our partners like the Forest Service, but I don't know how heavy the lift is for your application.
All right. I think this would be probably actually a good time to do the poll on, Jennifer, you had mentioned about the Data Explorer. And so I think at this time, I'm going to launch a poll, folks, and you can respond yes or no to the question as far as wanting access to the Natural Heritage Data Explorer. So you should see a window has opened up on your computer. And if it's not on the front, it might be behind your screen there, but. Okay, last chance to vote before I close the poll. If you haven't done so yet, now would be the time to do it. So we have 81% of those who responded saying yes, they want access, and 6 or 19% that responded said no. So thank you all for responding to that poll. Next up on the agenda, we're going to move on to more information about plan elements, the required plan elements, and Tom Giroux with the North Carolina Forest Service is going to cover that. Tom?
Hey, thanks, Bob. My name's Tom Giroux, Jr. I am the Water Resources Staff Forester with the North Carolina Forest Service out of the state office in Raleigh. I've been with the Forest Service here in Raleigh since 2002. My entire tenure with the Forest Service has been associated with non-point source pollution, best management practices, and currently my role is the water, anything having to do with policy and guidance, interpretations, compliance assistance tied to water quality, wetlands, and threatened endangered species. Before I came to work with the state, though, I worked for a vertically integrated forest products company, one of the big companies that owned timberland and had a bunch of mills. And most of my job with that company was as a harvesting forester. So I was doing pre-harvest planning by the seat of the pants every day. I was running logging contractors on a daily basis, getting timber cut on the company-owned land. And I found myself looking back on it now that, I really didn't put a lot of stuff in writing, aside from maybe a map. And I sketched a few things on the map and I'd hand it to the logger and we'd walk the track and say, okay, I'll see you later, check up on you in a few days. The intent of the program, we've had a couple questions come in. Let me see if I can try to help round up some things here a little bit before I give it in my slideshow. It's really an education outreach effort. If you think about what were the habitat needs we heard from Jennifer and Michael, we need to keep the sediment out of the creek, keep the siltation out of the creek. We need to maintain clear, unobstructed stream flow. We need to have good, temperatures maintained in the streams. We can't have a lot of hot temperatures in the water. We want to make sure there's no debris. We want to maintain continuity of the stream bed. Well, really all those things can be accomplished with FPGs, right? That's what the FPGs are fundamentally trying to also accomplish. And along with the buffer rules, the noose buffer rule, Tarpamica buffer rules, and fundamentally our BMPs. So hopefully when it comes to putting wheels on the ground, not a lot of things hopefully are going to have to alter greatly from what may have already been done. But this exercise, this planning process, this project is really a cost share for plan preparation. It is not a cost share for plan implementation. In other words, we're trying to cost share the process of undertaking some due diligence, as Ron mentioned, and think about what are some extra steps that go above and beyond just kind of run-of-the-mill pre-harvest planning, and help put some of that in writing. And here's the analogy that I have. In my house, let's say I'm planning to remodel my kitchen. I've kind of got an idea of what I want to do. But if somebody knocks on my front door and says, I'm going to prepare you a detailed architectural engineering design plan to remodel your kitchen, and it won't cost you anything. Great. Sign me up. Go ahead. I'm going to get a free plan. And I think the idea is that if somebody sits down and provides me with a detailed plan to undertake what I was already going to do, chances are I'm going to follow that plan, or I may follow most of the elements of that plan, and it's going to get me maybe thinking about things that I hadn't considered before. So that's the approach that we're trying to take, is trying to help incentivize forestry and wildlife practitioners and forest landowners to make them aware of these species, make them aware of the critical habitat, what are the habitat needs, how forestry BMPs can link into these, supporting these species, and then incentivize getting a well thought out, thorough, comprehensive plan prepared so that when the landowner comes time to pull the trigger and go ahead and get the timber cut, they can fall back on that and say, well, the recommendation was to do X, Y, and Z. Let's go ahead and do that. That sounds like a really good idea. So I want to kind of help bring all that together a little bit. My section here of the presentation is kind of talk a little bit about the nuts and the bolts of what the plan has to have in it to be eligible for the cost share program, and some of the more fundamental, tangible stuff on the ground. The first section talking about the soils review. Each of the soil survey books has a bunch of tables in the back of them. And one of those sections is called the Woodland Management section, or some of them, it may be called the Forest Productivity section. It's in each of the soil surveys. What needs to be done, what we're looking for is to look up the soil mapping units that are in the harvest area, and then identify what is the rutting hazard and what is the erosion hazard for all of the soil mapping units that are mapped for the harvest area. And each one of those comes with a rating. It's going to say something slight, or a moderate, or a severe. And again, the idea is that intuitively, some of the stuff may already be happening. You may already know what the tract looks like. You know what the soil, you have experience with the soils, and you may say, yeah, I cut a tract on this type of soil a couple of years ago and I had my hands full. That's cool. Just document that in the plan. Spell out, here's what the rutting hazard is, here's what the erosion hazard is, because sedimentation is such a critical concern for all of these species. We want to make sure that that plan identifies if there are areas that are even more important to make sure that erosion and sediment control measures are implemented. So here's an example that I pulled. I pulled this example from a different county that is outside of the project area. I pulled this out of Chatham County. That's because we hosted a class from NC State out on the public lands out at Jordan Lake, and we actually went through the tract and we walked this tract. It's about 100 acres, almost right at 100 acres. So, please ignore the fact that I'm outside the boundaries of the project area, but the idea is the same. This is a snapshot of the actual soil survey map from the book. The orange line is what I sketched in as the make-believe tract boundary. The blue line is what actually shows up as the streams from the soil survey book, and you see all the soil mapping units. So here's an example of what the actual printed book looks like. I just wanted to point this out to you. Take notice of where the streams are located, where they show streams on this map. We're going to revisit that in just a minute. Now, as I fast forward, here is the soils map from the forest pre-harvest planning tool that the Forest Service has available. Once you identify your area, you can click on the button, give me a detailed soils report. it's going to sit there and do its little spinny wheel for a while, and you get a report, and this is what it looks like. So the mapping units are the same. You can put this on an aerial photograph. It automatically puts it on an aerial photograph base map for you. Take notice though that the stream layers look a little different. Aha, that's noticeable. Okay. Let me switch back for just a second. Here's what the actual printed book showed. Okay. 1, 2, 3 streams. Here's what the digital computer web version shows. It only shows 2 streams. Okay, that's the importance of you've got to look at the printed soils book, especially if you're in a buffer rule area. So all the different soil mapping units on here that are featured on this make-believe tract, there's basically 4 of them, 4 large areas. There's different soils mapping units. You go back to the soil survey book. If you want to pull out the old book or you download the PDF manuscript, again, you go to the appendix in the back and you have these 2 sections, the haul road, log landing, rutting. Again, we're looking for rutting and we're looking for erosion hazard. On road, on trail, erosion hazard. You may see some erosion that says off road, off trail. We don't want that. We want the erosion that's going to be on the roads and on the skid trails. So again, you would click those two buttons there in the document. And the idea is you've got all of these mapping units. Again, if any of them trigger the severe rating, that's what we want to know. And we want to know what percentage, how much of the harvest area is covered by one of those severe rated soils. The example here is you've got 4 primary mapping units of soils that are on my make-believe tract. It's the GAC and the GICI and the GOC and the NAC. So what do those show us? When I clicked on this is the erosion hazard for roads. I had to cut and paste all the different tables so they fit on one slide. But you would go through all the different pages, and on the left, it shows the soil mapping unit, the GAC, the GKE, the GOC, and the NAC. And then the center column shows what is the hazard of erosion on roads and skid trails. That's what we're looking for. And sure enough, in this example, the Georgeville Baden complex is flagged as a severe rating for erosion. So that would be something to put into the plan saying, you know, this soils mapping unit as indicated on your tract is rated as a severe rating for erosion on roads and skid trails. So what I did is I went back and I went to the soils map and I just, you know, sort of, I hand colored in. You don't have to do that. I just did that for this presentation to show the magnitude of how much of that one soil mapping unit that is rated as severe for erosion covers the entire tract, this make-believe tract. And, you know, if you've got a calibrated thumb for doing basal area, you can kind of look at it and say, well, it's a little bit less than 50%. It turns out it's about 41% of the harvest area has this severe rating for erosion hazard. It's not just an exercise in futility. Okay, now that we know this information, what are we going to do about it? Okay, that's fundamentally what needs to kind of be described in the pre-harvest plan. If there are areas that are rated high for erosion, rated severe for erosion, rated severe for rutting, what are we going to do? What BMP measures should be implemented to help offset that elevated potential to have sedimentation and siltation into the streams and waterways? And that's the kind of BMP measures that can be described in the pre-harvest plan. One question that comes up, where did I get the 41%? The pre-harvest plan calculated that for me. So here's an example of a screenshot. I've identified my tract. And as Jennifer pointed out, over on the right-hand side, you have all the different buttons that says get reports. And you sit there and get reports and you go make a phone call and you go take a break, take a walk, come back, you got your reports. You click on where the arrow is pointing, the view detailed soil report. You click on the detailed soil report and it will give you like 10 or 12 pages long. It gives you a description of every soil mapping unit that's on your tract. And at the very top in that circle, it says right there, the Georgeville Baden complex, 41% of the tract. And then sure enough, if you go down under the section where it says, you know, BMP awareness, what is the rating? It flags severe erosion hazard, road and trail, severe rutting hazard. So all this information on the bottom half of this detailed soils report, it's just pulling it right from the NRCS database. It's pulling the same data that's coming out of the actual book. It's just rearranging it in a different format on the soils report from the pre-harvest planning tool. And you'll get a sheet of paper that looks just like this for every one of the soil mapping units that is on your tract. Like I said, if there's 10 soil mapping units, you're going to get a 10-page or 12-page report. If there's only one, you'll get 1 page. So that was the soils review. Basically, you know, what soils are there, and are any of them severe for rutting or severe for erosion, and then what are we going to do about it? The next section, part E, under the required plan elements, is a detailed description and plan for how the SMZs or the stream buffers are going to be handled. For participation in this project, the SMZ needs to be at least 50 feet on each side. The preference is to have the SMZ be left undisturbed. That's the preference. However, if timber is going to be harvested from the SMZ, we're just asking that a little bit more information be explained to detail how that timber harvest is going to be done in a way that's going to help maintain the water quality function of that stream. So on this slide here, number 3, if timber will be cut from an SMZ, simply describe, you know, what kind of timber is going to be cut, how will the timber be marked so everybody knows what goes and what stays, how is residual damage going to be minimized, how will the stream canopy shade be maintained so that we don't have a lot of extra sunlight reaching that stream and altering the stream water temperatures. And then how is the SMZ going to be marked? So again, everybody's working off the same page. The whole point of having a good plan is that plan is then shared with everybody involved in the harvest so that everybody is literally working off the same sheet of paper. Everybody understands what the expectations are. And then the other item here, 4B, does the SMZ include an ephemeral stream transition area? So what do I mean by that? The picture on the right shows where a couple of the streams end out in the middle of the harvest area. You know, usually in that situation, there's at least one ephemeral stream that kind of transitions into the intermittent or perennial. So the idea is, according to our best management practices, that SMZ should wrap around the end of that intermittent or perennial stream in sort of like a bubble to help capture that ephemeral transition area, because usually there's some active stream channel scouring going on. Usually there's some active movement of soil because the water's coming in off the landscape and falling down into that channel. So the SMZ just wraps a bubble around that. That type of explanation is what, you know, should go into the plan to describe that. Something, again, you as the plan writer, you know, you work with the landowner. You have the flexibility to adjust the level of management for each one of the SMZs based on what their needs are, based on what the rules require. For those of you who work in this area, you know that if I'm going to show an example here, the way you harvest timber from a SMZ is different, maybe different than how you harvest timber from a stream that has an SMZ and a buffer rule applied to it. Because the buffer rule, noose buffer rule, tar pamlico buffer rule, has very specific limitations on what can and cannot be harvested and where within the multiple zones timber can be harvested. So the harvesting regime can be different depending on what type of stream buffer or SMZ is established along that stream. And that's fine, just make sure that stuff is spelled out. The idea is that all of this information on the screen, items 1 through 4, would be described for each stream that's on the harvest tract. You know, again, because each one may be different. Now, if they're all going to be treated the same, you know, that could be lumped together and say all the streams are going to be treated in the following manner. and just describe it. But if in fact the streams are going to be treated differently, each one of those needs to be explained and described differently to include all of these elements in there. Before we think about what kind of SMZ we want to put on there, we got to know where are the streams. We got to verify the locations. This is going to require verification on the ground. There's no way around it, okay? That's not us saying that as the program administrators, that's just good forestry. It's going to require getting out and walking the track to verify where the streams are located. This is the make-believe track that I picked. This is the actual topographic map for this area that I downloaded from USGS. It shows two streams, one up here at the top and one meandering about halfway through the track going east to west. Okay, cool. Well, if you've been doing this long enough, you know that there's some pretty tight contour lines seen here. That V shape, remember the V shape usually indicates there's probably going to be a good chance there's some streams coming down off the valleys in some of these notches. Here's an example of the actual topographic map. My next slide shows the Forest Pre-Harvest Planning Tool topographic map. We were asked earlier if contour lines are provided, and yes, they are. A couple of different versions of contour lines are provided. As you get into making your map in the Pre-Harvest Planning Tool, you have this option of this drop-down list in the middle of the screen where you can pick what base map you want to look at. In this example, I selected the USGS topo. And sure enough, here's what popped up, and it shows two streams, one here at the top corner, partially cut off by the drop-down menu, and another one, again, cutting about halfway through the track. So this, this pre-harvest planning tool map matches, when I flip backwards to what the actual USGS map shows, they align with each other, they match each other. So, okay, that's cool. So the pre-harvest planning tool has a USGS layer. It also has a different layer that I selected. This is called simply the topographic layer. That drop-down list just says topographic. And what this shows is a shaded relief. There are no squiggly lines in the map. It simply shows the computer animation of a shaded relief. And if I look at this, I don't know how it's coming across through the Zoom, but I can see some pretty distinct valleys indicated through this shaded relief tool across this track. That would be a good place for me to start looking when I go to ground truth this property. Here's some places to go start at to help maximize my time. And there are other options for a different base map to pick from. So think about what the soils map showed for streams. Here's again a repeat of what the soils looked at for streams, the actual soil survey manuscript. Here's what the pre-harvest planning digital soils map showed. It shows two streams, one in the north, one in the middle. Now, here's my slide of how many actual streams exist on the ground for this tract. I walked all 100 acres of this tract, and I found a bunch more streams than what were shown on anybody's maps. That's it. We've got to make sure that we're verifying the streams on the ground. And sure enough, this one is here, number one exists. These other streams are what I just sort of manually drew on to the PowerPoint just for this presentation. But yeah, there's actually a stream here, location number 2. And sure enough, stream number 5 actually goes all the way through the track. And then there's 2 major branches that fork off of it that go up into the middle of the property. And then way down here at the bottom, down where that skinny neck is, there's actually a stream that cuts across there. And nobody showed that. I mean, that wasn't on the soils map. That wasn't on the shaded relief. That wasn't on topograph. Nobody showed that one. But sure enough, there's a stream down there that we'll have to deal with if you're going to be harvesting this track. So I just wanted to run through this example to show the importance of making sure we know where the streams are. And it's going to require some ground truthing, some verification. But we have the tools that can help lead you in those directions to look for the streams to help be efficient in our time. And then another option in the pre-harvest planning tool you have some different options for aerial imagery based maps. You've got 2 or 3 different options you can pick from, and it will allow you then to manually freehand draw streams or draw anything you want onto those maps, and you can print the map, save it as a PDF, and you'll have that. And this is an example of where I brought up the tract. I picked one of the aerial base maps and I just freehand drew the streams on there just myself to estimate their approximate locations. The pre-harvest planning tool also allows the user to put BMP features onto the map. So in this example, the little BX at the top is a bridge mat crossing. There's another bridge mat crossing dropped down further to the south. The D locates where the logging deck would go. There's a crosshatch that's hard to see, but it's there to represent where a streamside management zone would be. And there are many other BMP features that the user can select and drop on the map wherever they want. So you can draw on the skid trail, you can draw in the roads, you can put in water bar location, broad-based dip, turnouts, slash, any of the common BMP type of features. If you want to flag, hey, put water bars here, or make sure we put logging slash in this location, you can get as detailed as you want. You don't have to use this tool for this cost share project. You don't have to do that. We are simply showing you this opportunity that you have if you're not familiar with this tool, that you can do whatever level of detail you want to, but you don't have to use it for the cost share project. The next section is stream crossings. And again, for every stream crossing, all of this information needs to be explained in the pre-harvest plan. The preference is no stream crossings at all. That's may or may not be practical. If it's not practical, if there's going to have to be a stream crossing, the plan should have, it's going to need some extra descriptions of what are the extra BMP measures to make sure that, the water quality is protected. And again, number 2, if a crossing is needed, just justify it. Explain why a crossing is needed. Explain what BMPs are going to be recommended to be installed. The preference is to use portable bridge mats, but if portable bridge mats is not an option and instead something else is going to be installed, again, what type of a crossing is it? Is it going to be a permanent, temporary? If it's a culvert, please explain how the culvert was sized, what formula was used or what rationale was used to determine the size of that culvert. If it's a temporary crossing, when will it be removed and what BMP measures are needed? If it's a permanent crossing, what BMPs are needed for not only installation, but also long-term maintenance, because permanent culverts can be a real challenge for long-term maintenance. They get clogged. They can be a real challenge. So what kind of BMP measures should the landowner take for that long-term maintenance to make sure that that culvert is functioning properly? So all of these required plan elements would be needed for each stream crossing, where applicable. If you're going to use bridge mats everywhere, that's fine. Just explain, we're going to use bridge mats at the following locations, and here's some BMPs that should be implemented. But if there's going to be different types of crossings, different locations, those need to be identified and then explained. Just again, a lot of that stuff's probably already been going on, but it may not have just been written down in any sort of format. For the forest operations section, again, the preference is to try to keep all the stuff at least 50 feet from the edge of the SMZ, skid trail, log deck, new logging roads. But again, if they must be placed closer than 50 feet to the SMZ, just explain the need why, just justify it, explain why, and what kind of BMPs are going to be implemented to make sure that there's erosion sedimentation being managed on those log decks, skid trails, or roads. The preference is to use logging slash to help provide instant ground cover. Again, if logging slash is not going to be used, what other BMPs will be implemented to provide an equitable level of erosion sediment control measures? How are the petroleum chemicals and waste going to be managed and controlled so that it doesn't become a pollution problem? And then, item number 6 is what would warrant the logging needing to stop in order to maximize protection of water and soil conservation. What might be some things that if these things happen, logging should stop. Just again, is because the landowners, they don't know, some of them don't know, some of them may know, but whoever's going to be looking at handling the harvest administration of that timber harvest, it kind of gives them a set of standards, watch out situations. If you see these things happening, hey, watch out. You probably want to think about stopping until the situation improves. Those are for the person who's administering the harvest. That's not for us, the Forest Service. Okay, we don't have the legal authority to stop somebody from logging. The triggers here, the logging stop triggers are more for, again, the landowner's reference, the timber buyer's reference, whoever's going to be administering that timber harvest, the logger's reference, so that, look, on this tract, we've got some real special situations. We want to make extra careful protection to make sure that we're not exceeding some kind of threshold of soil disturbance or water quality degradation, that we want to make sure we're maximizing that protection. And then the last part would be making folks aware of what the rules are that apply to that tract, whether it's section the 15 required BMPs under section 404 for any sort of a stream crossing. What do the FPGs require? What do the buffer rules require if the buffer rule applies to that stream? And then, as Jennifer noted, if there are any special 4D rules that apply for a species that is in close proximity to this tract, what does that 4D rule require? And then provide a contact information to the county rangers so that within, we're asking to notify the forest ranger office within 3 days of starting the logging. It's 3 days before or 3 days after, whatever, but just once the logging gets started, please call a forest ranger so that we as a Forest Service can come and do our regular FPG inspections. Again, I wanted to make clear too, we're not going to pull out the plan and start going through the plan and saying, well, you didn't follow the plan. We're not doing that. That's not our role. Okay. This is a plan preparation cost share project. We want to see the plans developed. We'd like to see them implemented, but as Ron mentioned before, we understand there has to be flexibility and some allowances built in. We will be doing our regular FPG inspections. Okay, that's what we are there to do. And we will be looking at the buffer rules. If there is a buffer rule on the track, we'll be looking at that. And if we see a potential violation, we're going to handle that just like we normally handle it. So, our role in this really doesn't change at all. We do, and again, I think Jonathan mentioned, we have foresters that can help you identify which streams need a buffer rule and which streams do not need a buffer rule. So please let us help you with that. Give us a little advance notice. If the logger's unloading his equipment and you call our forester and say, I need you out here, we may not be able to get out there right away. Give us a few days at least so that we can put it into our schedule. But we can do that for you. We're glad to do that for you. That's a whole separate deal, separate from this, cost share project, but we can do that as part of our normal day-to-day services. On our website, we're going to have the handbook that's going to explain everything that you've heard about today. You're also going to see a mock-up example of a pre-harvest plan that tries to show how this information was put together into a Word document. And both of these are going to be in Word documents so that you can copy and paste whatever you want to and use it. We don't care. If you want to borrow what we've done, fine. If that includes all the information, great. But these two documents, well, soon will be posted to our website. And where is that website? That is through it's also going to be through the webinar portal, I believe. Very soon, it will be onto the North Carolina Forest Service website. You go to our website, go to programs and services, right around here, go to managing your forest, and then come down here, financial assistance, where the great big blue arrow is pointing, Foresters for Healthy Waters. You click that, it explains the program very briefly, and then there's a related resources, just like you see here, with several links underneath that. There's going to be the application form is going to be there. the handbook to explain what is needed in the plan. It's going to be there. The mock-up example pre-harvest plan will be there, and other resources that hopefully will be helpful for you. The handbook, here's the handbook. It has a section with links to all the different online websites that Jennifer discussed, and even some more that we didn't cover today, but we thought may be helpful for you. You can use whatever ones you want to, as long as the information that the plan requires is covered. And then just an example, I just wanted to show the mock-up example pre-harvest plan. Here's an example of the section that was discussed in our mock-up example, our pretend pre-harvest plan, about stream number 4 requires both an SMZ and a buffer rule. And in this particular example, I wrote, harvest timber in accordance to the whatever buffer rule, leave zone 2 standing, do not clear cut. The rule allows you to do that, don't get me wrong, but in this example, I just said, well, we're going to say, don't clear cut it, just as an example. And then how do we minimize damage? Harvest trees and fell them outside. Provide stream shade, the ephemeral area the stream ends, the SMZ will be wrapped around the head of the stream to include the ephemeral area. Here's an example of just how to justify why do we need a stream crossing? Well, the entire stream it bisects the tract. There's no way to get across it. There's no good place for a logging deck on the south side of the stream, and there's a golf course community on the backside. We can't come in from the backside, so we got to cross the stream. Okay. I mean, again, we're not going to challenge you on that and whoa, did you really? We're just trying to help promote the idea of going through that due diligence process and trying to help provide a detailed plan for the landowners and see if that helps to drive perhaps that above and beyond implementation of BMPs. And then this is the last example I'll show is the bridge mats, an example of some BMPs to consider for bridge mats. Use at least 3 bridge mats. Don't leave a gap in the middle. Make sure they're butted together tightly. Lay down some curb logs so that the debris minimizes the amount of stuff that gets slopped over. Leave some bumper trees and so on and so on. Some common BMPs that are probably already being implemented, just spell them out so that everybody is, again, working off the same page. And that concludes my presentation, and I hope that was helpful for you. And again, our handbook and everything else is going to be available on our website very soon.
Thank you, Tom. Folks, if you got questions of Tom, I'd like to have you enter those in now so we can ask them. I did share in the chat both the link to the handbook and mock-up of the pre-harvest plan on the portal. It is available there now, and also provided the link to the Forest Service cost share portion of their website so that you can get to the Foresters for Healthy Water link there also. So it doesn't look like we have any questions at this time. We are a little ahead of schedule, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Ron, do you have anything you want to share before we go into a 10-minute break?
I do not. We'll hold anything to the end, I think, for the last 2 presentations.
All right, so let's take a break. We'll start back up at 2 p.m. Hello, everybody. Robert Barton here. I want to welcome you back to the webinar. It's almost 2 o'clock, and we're going to be getting started here. So this is your chance to get back in your seat, get your pad and pencil together if need be, so you can take some more notes. And to remind you that we are taking questions, and if you enter those into the Q&A feature, we'll be happy to answer those here towards the end of the presentation. I do want to mention at the end of the presentation, I will touch base on how you get your continuing education credits at that time. So we will go over that information, but not till the end here. Up next in the presentation is a virtual field trip, and that's going to focus on putting the plan into action And David Halley with True North Forest Management Services is going to take us on this trip. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to David.
Thank you, Bob. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Okay. Welcome, everybody. My name is David Holly. I run and operate True North Forest Management Services, which is a consulting firm out of Holly Springs, North Carolina. I've been a consultant for 20 years, probably 14 years. Prior to that, I worked for the Virginia Department of Forestry as a service forester. So I've got a pretty diverse background, both in state government and as a consultant. But they asked me to sort of talk about, as a consultant, how can I, what steps do you go through to develop a pre-harvest plan? How do you implement these during the operation? What are some tips and strategies that you might be able to help other consultants in the process of getting this report and plan developed, and actually getting it implemented on the ground is probably more important. I sort of have a position, action, and benefit statement, but basically my position is that I believe that all, consultants, we should not be just doing what's required. We should really be committed to implementing BMPs, and that they should be above and beyond what is minimally required by regulations to protect water quality and critical habitat. I just think if somebody hires a consultant, I think the expectations need to be high, and we need to be that above and beyond. What I'd like to do in the next 20 minutes is kind of share some ideas, some tips and strategies on BMP planning and implementation on your harvesting jobs. And what I think you'll find is even though some of this stuff is time consuming and in some cases more costly to implement, that in the long run, your client's going to be much more pleased with the product that you produce and the condition of the forest is left when you're done. Plus the added benefit of water quality and aquatic habitat protection. And again, the bottom line with our clients is that we're doing more than growing trees. We're growing clean water. I mean, it's a byproduct of what we do. And our actions really help make that happen. The other bottom line, I think, is that if we don't do or go or be part of that above and beyond, we will be regulated. And that is not where we need to be headed. We need to be ahead of the curve. So this talk is about really trying to do more than what's required. This is what makes us stand out and why people hire consultants, is because we provide that added benefit, that above and beyond. All right. Okay, so here's kind of my outline for the above and beyond BMP strategies. Basically, do your homework, ground truth the harvest area. Tom talked a lot about that. In fact, I'm gonna share a lot of the same kind of tools that he shared with us. Plan and build roads and stream crossings ahead of time, have good timber contract language, and then frequent site visits during the logging operation. So doing your homework, this is kind of a summary of that. Just view and create maps where all potential streams are located on the property. Use a topographic map to help identify ephemerals and stream channels. Figure out if you have to cross a stream to access timber. There's a lot of conditions where you don't have any, there is only one way to get to that one section of timber. You actually have to cross a stream. But a lot of that, if you look at topographic maps ahead of time, you kind of know that you're going to have to find one in that area. Are they avoidable? Sometimes you don't know that until you get out to the track. Will you need to build truck access roads to be able to access the timber? I always think it's helpful to create a soils map before you head out to the woods. Do a little bit of research. Like Tom said, look for those soil issues, those erosion issues, and those rutting issues when you get out there. So those, having a soils map maybe help you determine where a good place to put a deck is that won't, that's less of an erosion hazard. Here's an example of the stream identification that True North did on a piece that we manage. The map on the left is basically a 50-foot buffer on what we'd identified as streams on the track. And then what we did is we looked at the Jordan Lake buffer rules and where they applied. And then actually after we flagged and mapped all our existing buffer rules, they were greater than what actually was required by law. And in fact, in some cases, it's even greater than if we were going to do a subdivision on this particular tract. But for this landowner, water quality was the #1 priority. So we were really basically buffers on steroids in mapping out these and protecting these areas. So you notice that Jordan Lake buffer rules are required 45 acres of buffer, and our proposed buffers was 137 acres. Pretty significant increase. Here's a tract that we're currently working on. We're getting ready to do a plantation thinning on, and we use the pre-harvest planting tool to map out the soils here. So this is a really nice tool to look at what exists out there, what we might run into. And as Tom showed us, it gives a specific detailed analysis of each of those main soil types. This soil only represents 6.8%, but it has a very severe, erosion hazard down in here. So a rutting hazard. So this is critical that, the timing of that harvest may need to occur during the dry period. We also printed out a topographic map before we headed to the woods. And, in this case, looks like an intermittent stream here and one that kind of cuts across the corner here. But also looking at the topography, we know that there were some other areas that we need to kind of keep an eye on, and we kind of map those out ahead of time. So before we go to the woods, we know that, there's some other areas here that we need to make sure we keep an eye on as we map this particular area out. So this is the part of doing your homework, soils maps, get some topographic maps, bring that in your woods. I also like using software to help us accurately map that information once we get out in the woods. Okay, step 2, ground truth to harvest area. This is basically your initial site visit. The strategy used there. Take your maps to the wood, and we mark the stream buffers as we go along. But we're also using a mapping tool that's mapping it as we go, so we get a very accurate map of what buffers are. I always say, flag with your feet and your eyes, as you walk the land, let the land and the species guide your buffer widths. And for us, it's just, you can sort of see that transition where, the uplands kind of convert to sort of a flat bottomland. That's kind of where we like to keep that buffer. Certainly much wider than 50 feet in a lot of instances, but we're, our philosophy at True North is, let's just manage the upland sites. Let's leave a lot of the riparian and flat bottom areas to Mother Nature. We also looking to avoid wet areas, sensitive areas. There might be some ephemeral pools that are important that we protect. There might be a particular interesting plant, that we want to. It might even be certain ferns that we might want to protect to keep out of it. Again, is at the introduction, landowners are interested in that. They're interested in protecting nature. They're interested in protecting water quality and beauty. And so it's real critical as you do your initial analysis that you try to be sensitive to some of those beautiful areas along the edge of those creeks. And those are really kind of, in most cases, some of the prettiest places on properties. The other thing is we're going along, we know that prior to when we get out there that there's going to be certain streams or creeks that we're going to have to cross. So we're looking for potential stream crossings. And there's good spots and bad spots. And as we go, we actually will look for those and flag those out as we go. The other thing is that when we walk through, we need to figure out what's the best stream crossing option. Can we use a portable bridge? Is a culvert an option? Throwing logs in the creek, a rock ford. And that's both for haul roads and skid trails. So, and then we use a mapping software that's really important to kind of create a map. This is an example of a product we produce, but as you can see, there's pretty detailed lines. This was all GPSed. So this ended up being an SMZ here and then another one here. Technically was one down here, but we, because it was outside the thinning area. And we GPS these potential stream crossings. We call them potential, my advice is, try to create more than one option. So you give a logger an option. Ultimately, when we get out there and do the thinning, we're going to restrict them to just one crossing. He's not going to be able to use both of them, but a lot of cases, anybody deals with loggers, they like options. So in this case, we're not restricting. We say, hey, you got one or two options. You pick which one you think works best for you. This also has the harvest boundaries, the existing roads, the fact that there's a gate. We really haven't put a deck on this area yet. I mean, my guess based on the topography is going to be somewhere in this area, but a lot of times loggers like to help you pick out decks. All right, here's my repair and buffer rules. And really these are really true north. There's a lot of you that do a lot different than me. But this is kind of what we, sort of our philosophy is, plan them ahead of time, make them wide or as wide as, you can, flag them. And this is probably a big difference in a lot of you out there is that we stay out of them. We do not cut any timber in our buffers. We flag them, we stay out of them. We avoid any potential water quality problems or issues. Is there valuable trees in there? Certainly. Our philosophy is that they have created a higher value from a water quality habitat standpoint. So that's just, that's where we sort of draw the line in the sand. We don't cross them, but if we do, we design them right. Bob, just to check, everybody can still hear me?
Good.
Okay, cool. All right, so plan for them. So in this case, this is a harvest map. All these pink areas are riparian buffers. This has all been ground truth. The management areas are really just, the other areas on these ridge tops. In this particular case, except for maybe that piece there, but we could go around it. There's no need for a stream crossing. Most of this we could get access to without having to cross the stream. Make them wide, in this case, slope had a lot of influence on us. So on steep slopes, we try to make our buffers wide. The creek is way down here. I would guess this is at least 100 to 200 foot buffer right here. All right. But, a wide buffer, yes, we know that 50 feet is probably all that's needed to get sediment from entering the stream, but there's other, objectives we're trying to achieve, and that's wildlife corridor. These are much better wildlife corridors than a small buffer. The other thing, just make them wide enough that they work. And a lot of these aren't really even, they're not even perennial streams. In a lot of cases, they're intermittent and probably ephemerals, technically probably at the upper end of this. In this case, we actually left even what we call an aesthetic buffer along this road. You can make them wide or you don't. This is not our job, by the way, but I don't see a lot of riparian buffers in that. If they are, they're very narrow. So, and I can tell from, these skid things that they had some rutting issues. Hope that's not one of your jobs out there. All right, flag them. I think it's real important, they're flagged and they're flagged real frequent, make them real easy to see. I have actually seen consultants, and we started doing some instances where they actually paint them, and I think that's a good idea. You could, paint them a specific color so that flags have a tendency to dry and fall off, especially, sometimes it takes 2 years for some of these logging jobs to get started. So it's a much more permanent condition and easier to see. Mark them high, highly visible paint. But in our case, one of the easy things is when they see flag, they stop. So they know that they're not going to go anywhere beyond that. Stay out of them. That's just the true north philosophy. I know some of you do some different stuff, but in this case, this is a, oak shelterwood system. We leave these big riparian buffers and then we manage the upland sites for oak and hickory. So this is the stay out buffer. This is what we're actually truly managing. And if you don't have to cross them, don't. All right. That's just, but in a lot of cases you have to, and you have to figure out a way to do it. All right. So 3, plan and build roads and stream crossings ahead of time. I'm just saying, doing it at the time of the the harvest operation or letting the logger do it is not our philosophy. We just think we just get a much better job if we do it ourselves ahead of time. Yes, there's some upfront costs that are involved in that, but we get a product we want. And in a lot of cases, I think we generate more income from those types of timber sales because a lot of the hard work is done and they don't have to figure out, well, I don't have 2 days of bulldozing work and loads of gravel. And, but we, if we build a road and we build it right, then they're responsible for keeping it up, make it as good or better. So one of the things we have to assess when we're there, do roads already exist? Do we need to upgrade our existing roads? Do we need to build any new ones? What are the soil conditions? What soils do we need to kind of avoid when we're building roads? Do we have to cross a creek with a logging truck? And do we have to cross a creek with a skidder? And those are two different types of crossings. And one has to hold up 80,000 pounds. The other has to have a skidder, but he's dragging trees across. So there's different techniques for each of those types of crossings. All right, this is basically True North's haul road rules is better you than them, which means, we do them, not the logger. I mean, skidders are not designed to build roads, and most consultants know that. It's cheaper, but you don't get a very good product. We keep away from streams. We avoid crossings at all possible. But once we build something and make it right, then it's the responsibility of the logger to take care of it during logging operation. Then it's very important to gate any roads that you have to control access. Sometimes the erosion issues are not during logging, it's actually after logging when we get the yahoos that want to take their four-wheelers and their 4x4s for joy rides around your track on your nicely, made road. So we build them, all right? And we hire a bulldoze contractor that has really good experience. This is generally what happens if they build them. All right, they push them in. They're not designed to get water off the road. They hold water. It's a mess. Okay, yeah, you can fix that, but it's just not ideal. This is kind of another example if they build them. This is 8 years later. I mean, they don't. That track is not. That's still holding water, and it's just not designed to get water off the road. So we do it and we do it right. We build them wide. We get them daylighted. We get them so that they drain. If there's a creek crossing, we actually, this is a haul road this is for tractor trailer traffic. We use the proper culvert sizing. This is a big culvert. In fact, we replaced a culvert that was on this crossing with this larger culvert. There's my advanced scout, Jax. You'll probably see him in a lot of these photographs. He's very photogenic. So. The other thing nice about building roads on your own is that you can do it when the weather conditions are ideal. So, if you start a logging job and you have 3 inches of rain, it's not a good time to be building the road. The other nice thing about building ahead of time, you give it 2 or 3 weeks or even 3 or 4 months. Rain can work in your favor. It can actually pack that soil back down. Newly built roads are horrible for logging traffic because they're still fluffy. They haven't been pacted. There's nothing worse than building a road and then putting a logging truck on it the day after. It just doesn't work. You've actually created a worse situation than a better situation. So giving it time, letting the sun dry it out, and then the rain to pack it down is it's our standard practice. If we can get ahead of time and get that done. Then rock or gravel areas where you need it. This is kind of a low area, just support to put a load of gravel there. There's my scout. And then you also have to design it to have, take water off the road. So in this case, this, you can't see that, but the road is designed so it pushes the water off this road into this vegetated area before it gets down this hill. And you'll see another one here, and then you'll see another water diversion here before it gets to probably which was a small drainage. All right, sort of haul road stream crossing strategies. Again, avoid them at all possible. Any kind of haul road that you have to design across a creek is expensive, But if you do, cross it at right angles. Use a timber bridge if you have well-defined banks. I think that's important. we've really started using a lot of rock forwards. We like the option. They're expensive, but as far as a long-term solution, they're really a good tool. One thing we like about it is it doesn't impact stream flow. So even for invertebrates and amphibians, I mean, it's, water flows over it, and they can get up and down it. It's not being restricted by a culvert. And we've even seen otters that'll float through our fords, so it's really kind of a cool thing from a wildlife perspective. It doesn't restrict, and it's if you just create a hard bottom to it, then it's a good road, but you're not really impacting the stream. Culverts work if they're sized right, but boy, they require a lot of maintenance. And one of the biggest concerns we have as a company is that, with global warming, we're getting these really high frequency, high volume rainfall events, and all the culverts aren't designed for that. And we're having problems, and they're a pain. If you almost have to maintain them at least once a year, going to make sure there's debris not trapped behind them. And I think there's just a lot of culverts out there that even our landowners have put in themselves that are way grossly undersized, just not designed. So culverts are not the best option. For large stream crossings, we go to the nth degree. This is basically a stream crossing on steroids. In this case, we dug 2 or 3 feet into the ground. We put geotextile matting down. We put riprap down. We put another fabric on top of that, and then probably heavy stone on that. And then he's putting in probably, the last layer of gravel on top of it to give it sort of a smooth surface. But you can see sort of the geotextile mats here. The beauty of this thing is water can flow over it and through it, and it doesn't restrict flow. All right. And that's critical in these river bottoms, because once the creek gets up, the water gets out of its bank and the water is going to be flowing outside of this area. So this allows for a nice flow. This is kind of about just right after we finished it. We also seeded these areas here with, with vegetation. We used a fabric map in certain areas. If you notice here, we also put a water monitoring station. We did a kind of a cooperative project with the U.S. Forest Service and the North Carolina Forest Service on what this harvest operation above and below it, what impact it had on water quality. As you might expect, it had none. This is that same crossing, a year later. You can see where it's been revegetated. I mean, you can drive a truck across this, which is nice, but I don't think people realize, but below this, we dug this out. We dug this out 3 feet, almost to bedrock, put riprap on it, geotextile matting, and then we put a load of gravel on top of it. But in order to do that, it was pretty fancy. We dammed it up ahead of here. We had a pump that pumped the water around into a silt bag over here. I mean, we did it right, Now this was for the Orange Water and Sewer Authority, so they just, they had to, whatever it takes. We don't want any problems. So, and then we had to take the bags apart and make that happen. Here's another example of one that I did in Caswell County, another Rockford crossing. Also, in this case, we actually made our own bridges. So, these were like large 8x8s, and we had large T-bars underneath it so the water could flow underneath it. And in this case, 700 loads of timber went across that bridge right there. Here's another one using the metal mats. These are really effective. Here's that water quality monitoring station that we put up. Kind of interesting. Again, probably close to 1,000 loads went across that bridge right there, and we never had a single issue. So here we are, strawing it and seeding it. Some other options for small drainage crossings, you can use bridge mats. This is actually something that the buyer did, the timber buyer. They actually put up these little silt fence for us, so I thought that was a touch of class. But I think you can see where they strawed and seeded above and below it. Here's that same crossing after it's done. So I mean, and just as long as we can get the stream channel be uninhibited, this will, this is either an ephemeral and an intermittent at the most. but there it's dried up. Culverts, I'm not a big fan of culverts just because I think they're grossly undersized. In this instance, somebody, I don't even know what it was. It was some kind of big barrel and they cut the hole out of it. You can see it's just jammed up with materials. It's not working. You can see where it's all ponded up behind it. What happens is this ponds up and the water flows over top and erodes all these banks. This is extremely problematic. This one's probably a little bit better design. You know, it's got a high things, but you got to keep these maintained. Here's one we put in. If you look in the background, that was the culvert that was there. It was terrible. And then it got pretty much blown out. The upper end of this had just scarred out. The front of this had actually, you know, all the water had gone around it. The original road had eroded to probably about 7 feet. We could barely get a truck across it. And then we had to use this for a tractor trailer. Also, you know, dress them up, gravel them when you're done. It's also a nice touch for the landowner, especially the entrances. You know, roads don't have to be ugly. You know, put some curbs into them, daylight them, get a lot of sun on them, gate them. That's really important when you're, you know, after you're done to keep the yahoos out of them, as we say. And then, you know, once you're done, go dress them back up, regrade them, restabilize them. A lot of those turnouts get, you know, messed up. It's critical that you come back and do the follow-up work. Here's one after it's been logged. We've just, you know, we recrowned them, reestablished our turnouts. And then we like to seed them. This is actually switchgrass. And we actually, you know, if anybody's done switchgrass or ormston grasses, is, you know, don't give up on them. The first year is like, oh, this is terrible. And this is probably 3 years later. And now we just do, you know, annual mowing of this. They're, you know, outside the nesting seasons, and it's, you know, it's really, really nice habitat too. So these are kind of our strategies. You build them, plan them, you know, plan and build them when the conditions are good. Avoid doing it during wet weather. Contour them on the land to avoid wet areas. Daylight them. Avoid steep areas. Allow it to settle before using that. The rain really helps you out there. Build and handle stormwater. Build them so they can handle. So basically, get the water off the road and not down the road. Design the crossings properly. Rock and gravel is needed. And after you're done, regrade them, stabilize them, and then control access. All right, these are just skid trail stream crossing strategies. You know, pick a good section of stream with a well-defined stream channel. I think is critical. Pick sections of stream to allow you to get in and out as quickly as you can. It's worse to go to a flat bottom for 100 yards and then another flat bottom. If you can find an area that's kind of pinched a little bit, those are ideal areas to put your crossings. We also flag the crossings with blue flagging, just stretch a lot of blue paint, so there's no doubt that that's where it's going to be. And again, we try to provide more than one option. We try to use portable bridges, and that's just the most ideal situation. You can pull them in and pull them out. We try to avoid log pole crossings. We have used them on small ones, but it's, you know, it's not ideal. It's actually more work for the logger when they're done. We also try to use bumper trees. We try to use trees so that what happens is that we can keep them close together. When that load comes through across that crossing, it pinches it in and makes it smaller. So it's not, all the trees aren't falling out over the side and dragging and raking the creek. We slash the approaches, and we usually try to get them to do that as soon as it's cut out and not after it's been rutted up, guys. You know that. You just got to put that slash down before you start running a bunch of, you know, skidders over it. And then when we're done, we really like to put them on after we're done. You know, they're really good stabilizers. Clean out the stream channel is important. Here's what you don't want to see. You know, this is just a really bad example of somebody's stream crossing. This is one we use. There's a creek there. We used a metal bridge, and then we used some extenders. This is a really good technique here where I think they're teaching this in the logger courses, where they're putting, you know, logs across it. It helps keep the trees on the mats instead of flowing over it. And then, you know, we slash, you know, this is where it's going back up the hill. We slash that hillside, and then this gets slashed, gets a lot of slash. It's a good place to put slash. Here's another example of crossing. Again, here's a good example where we use logs to kind of help pinch those trees in together, and the use of slash on both sides. And this is after we're done, you make sure you clean out the stream, in this case, we actually used some straw to stabilize these approaches. And there's my buddy right there, photobombing me here. Here's just an example of how we strawed that crossing. Timber contracts, real quick, put it in the contract. The roads need to be left in good or better shape than they were found. We basically say BMPs are mandatory. We also do an initial site visit. We get with the logger on the very first day. Again, the very first day and the day before the last day are the two most important days of logging visits. You get everything straight, and then if there anything needs to be fixed, it's done before they, leave the site and claim they didn't know about it. So again, you take your maps with them, you review your harvest maps and your harvest guidelines, you talk about your flagging and how you've painted it, and what are leaf trees, what are non-leaf trees, where's the deck, you can pick up your trash, how are you going to handle, spills. These are, stuff, we just keep going over and we have a little checklist we go through each time with them. We talk to them about, stream crossing rules. We talked to them about, we have the ability to stop logging if it's too wet or conditions not being met. The ideal situation is they call me and say, Dave, it's too wet. Then you've done it right. It's like, Dave, hey, it's just too wet. We can't log today. And I said, that's awesome. I really certainly appreciate that. Or if you see 2 inches of rain coming the next day, you call them that night and say, hey, what do you think about tomorrow? Yeah, maybe we need to stay home, or maybe we just need to kind of work on the deck and do maintenance. I said, well, that's a good idea. All right. And then ultimately, you've got to make frequent site visits. You need to make some adjustments on the fly. Maybe something's not working, or an area you didn't know about that just got rutted to heck and you need to stay out of it. But these guys really want to do a good job, make them, they need to be you're working cooperatively, they want you to be pleased. You want your landowner to be pleased. And so, try to stay out of their way, but, stay ahead of it. This pre-planning tool, I think, is a really good thing to help. I think any logger or any buyer that buys our tracks that has a pre-harvest plan is going to say, well, at least I know they got their act together. Everything's flagged out. Everything's planned. Your roads are well designed. You're not costing me money. I can move right into that site and get started. And that's, to them, that's money. Time is money. There's my contact information. Questions? Yeah.
So at this time, does anybody have questions for David? Remember, you can add those into the Q&A feature as we're going through the webinar and everything. Dave, you did a great job presenting. At this time, I don't see any questions. So what we'll do is move on to our next presentation. And our next presenter is Brian with the North Carolina Forest Service, and he's going to review the checklist and summary. It's Handbook Appendix C. And if you're ready, Brian, we'll get started.
All right, hang tight 1 second. All right, we're sharing yet? Yeah.
Yes, you are. You might want to zoom in a little bit on that image.
Yep, I got you. Yeah, so I'm Brian Michelson. Just real quick, I think I'm the last thing between us and the finish line. So I'll try to breeze through this pretty quick, but I'm the water quality forester for the eastern half of Region 2, and I pretty much cover all the counties that this pilot program that this program covers. So just real quick about my job, it's my job to coordinate the water quality program within the districts and provide technical guidance to our personnel as well as landowners and industry professionals as it relates to water quality. So really, essentially, I work to coordinate the forest practice guidelines program and buffer rule program within the area. I'm certainly not going to go over this list verbatim. It's been covered pretty extensively today, and Tom and everybody, Dave has done a great job of pretty much covering everything on this list. So But I did want to point a few things out. If you'll take a look at the screen, you'll see that this is the Appendix C. I think it's the very last page in the handbook, which was posted in the chat box earlier today, so you can check that out. This is the list that our agency is going to use to make sure that all the requirements are in each plan. And if you look at this list at the top, it says there it's the minimum required standard. So use that at your own discretion. If you want to add more, you can. But all of these boxes have to be checked yes in order to meet the requirements. And I hope this list is something that you can use as a guide, as a reference tool. It's certainly what we'll use as reviewers of these plans to ensure that all of the requirements are met. But really, as we've talked about throughout the day, this program is just a really good way to get ahead of these issues that we see on a day-to-day basis, especially from my standpoint in water quality. And it's my job to recommend measures to correct non-compliance of FPGs and develop pre-harvest plans and really educate all parties involved. And Tom touched on that pretty thoroughly. But really, what that means for me is figuring out ways to fix problems well after the fact. And that's something I hate doing, but it's pretty common for the job. When I show up, there's usually an issue, and the loggers and timber buyers are well gone at this point. So we have to work collectively to come up with a plan and try to fix a problem with what resources we have left. So, pre-harvest planning's tough. We've touched on it all day long. Dave Halley did a great job talking about pre-harvest planning. And when I was working as a consultant and doing procurement, pretty much our pre-harvest planning, pretty much the extent of my pre-harvest planning happened the day the cutting machine showed up on site. And you ran out there real quick. Maybe you had a map, freshened up lines, SMZs. You show the logger where to go, where not to go. And you were back down the road checking in periodically. You had tracks to cruise, you had landowners to meet, loggers to manage, and things like that. So, using this list and putting these plans together, I think can fix a lot of problems that could have been avoided ahead of time. This whole program, I think letting everybody know, just like Dave said, having a briefing the day the job starts or just prior to the job starting, and getting everybody on board is critical. Showing folks where the critical habitat is, where the threatened and endangered species are, is huge. And I think doing that, once everybody in this process, from the landowner to the consultant to the timber buyer to the skidder operator, the cutting operator, once they really know what the purpose of this program is and what the purpose of pre-harvest planning is, I think they'll be less apt to push the boundaries, so to speak. Drop trees through SMZs, cross SMZs where it's unnecessary. Trim those SMZs down to the point where they're just not functional anymore. Using these tools, this checklist to kind of go through that and cover all the aspects and then brief everybody on the process. And something I think that needs to be done, especially now with kind of this whole process, is getting the landowners more involved. Typically, landowners don't have that much a say in the process. They own the land. They want to see, like Dave said, a pretty end result. They want the track to look nice. They want it to be functional. But using this pre-harvest tool as a method to get landowners involved is a really good way to make them understand the importance of the program and what we're trying to do here. And yeah, just letting them be a part of the process. If you look at the top of this list, you know that there's a little section there that says landowner objectives for the harvest, and most time landowners just don't have a say in it. You know, they can tell you what they want cut or thinned or select cut or clear cut, but how wide their SMZs are or whether or not they have critical habitat is just usually something that's not covered. And I think this program will be really good at getting them involved. And if you look at this list, you'll definitely see, let me zoom out real quick. It's pretty extensive. There's actually a lot here. It's definitely a lot more than your standard forest management plan. This is the second page. So I think there's actually 40 boxes here that have to be checked off. So these are pretty thorough plans. All the tools that you need have been discussed earlier here today. And, you know, there shouldn't be any questions on how you can go about doing this. But yeah, just as a plan reviewer, somebody that's reviewed a lot of plans, you know, I just hope you use this list to ensure that everything's met in the plan and that this program is a success. I think pre-harvest planning is something that we overlook, certainly overlook most times, and most of the issues that I deal with FPG violations, buffer rule violations, and things like that could have been avoided, and not just here in this area that this program covers, but statewide. I think if we did a little better job at pre-harvest planning, I think everybody's job would be a little easier, and I think some good changes would come down the road. That's really all I have for that. You can take a look at that list. I mean, like I said, it's very self-explanatory. We've covered it over and over today, and I will real quick like to put up my contact information because I am the guy that covers this area. And if you have any questions with stream determinations, SMZs, crossings, pre-harvest planning, I would love to talk with you, chat with you, get out there, walk the track with you. You know, it's like I said, it's really important, and I think it's something that moving forward, if we could do more of, it would alleviate a lot of these problems that I see, especially, and other folks throughout the state. So if you have any questions, feel free to give me a shout or give me a call, shoot me an email, whatever. Like I said, I've been more than happy to get out there and take a look at what you got, and we can stumble through it together and figure it out. So I'm gonna turn it back over to the moderator. I appreciate it. Like I said, any questions, feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Brian. So Ron, we're open for questions and answers on anything that was presented today. So folks, if you got questions, need clarification on anything, now would be time to ask those questions. Ron, do you have any insight or anything you'd like to share with the group?
Certainly want to add just a few more things, Bob, is my thanks to the presenters today and the planning team. It took a lot of work to get this project off the ground, and soon we'll be up and running. So again, we mentioned a July 1, 2021 as a tentative start date to begin accepting applications for the program. Just want to let some of the consultants or resource managers on the presentation know today that we will be following up with probably some informational mailers to landowners within the project areas using our stewardship database or tree farm database, and particularly ones where the Forest Service has recommended a referral to a consultant because it involves harvest and thinning. So, you know, if you're working with a client already, they may receive a mailer, and we just like to give a courtesy heads up to let them know about this program and invite them to take advantage of some financial assistance to work with resource professionals to prepare a pre-harvest plan. So that'll be another part of our follow-up for this project. We certainly will be meeting the planning team after this workshop, you know, in a week or two, and you know, we'll take a look at the program. We value your feedback and input, so certainly any feedback and input you have on how we can make this project a success at the ground level, or things that maybe we haven't considered that came up after listening to the workshop, We welcome your feedback and input. That will help us at least provide additional clarification to landowners, resource managers that are implementing the program, along with field staff or agency personnel.
All right, thanks, Ron. Couple comments that have come in that I just want to share with everybody. One, Tom Giroux wants to remind everybody that the North Carolina Forest Service has bridge mats available to borrow, both at the Rocky Mount District and Hillsborough District. And also that fords are very good when done well, but are only for haul roads, not for skidding. And that log poles in the channel should only be used on dry, intermittent, or ephemeral streams, not perennial streams. The other comment that has come in is from Mark Hall, who just wants to remind folks that it's a good idea to throw in some pollinator species along the roadsides. Comments that landowners love them. So if there's any more questions, please ask them at this time. And what we'll do is just real quick, let me highlight about CFEs, because I know many of you are on the webinar and wondering how do you go about that process to get your continuing education credits. If you kept your screen open when you joined today's webinar, what you should have seen is on the screen, it said step 1, and you clicked on that to start the webinar. So once you're done today and we close the Zoom window, you'll go back here to your screen and click on complete the webinar. What that will do is launch a quick little survey that we asked you to complete about today's webinar. Take about a minute to complete. And then after that, it'll bring you back to the portal page in order for you to fill out a form, which you'll put in your name, email, your registered forester number or SAF number, things like that. And that will complete the process once you submit that form. Once you submit the form, you will get an email almost immediately with your certificate showing that you've earned the CFEs. If you run into trouble, just drop me an email and I will help you with that process. So it's pretty straightforward, pretty simple and everything. Let's just checking to see if there's anything else.
I think there was one chat comment that came up, Bob.
Yeah, so Jennifer also has provided her email address there in the chat, and it's available for you to, she's happy to field questions and provide resources as needed. And then a comment from Chris Smith says, I have heard several presenters, contributors during the presentation say the North Carolina Forest Service referral a consulting forester. I did not know the North Carolina Forest Service was in the referral business, but know they can provide a list of consultants to landowners. But I don't think they're supposed to guide folks to a particular consultant. Please clarify the position on this.
Yes, I can address that. That's certainly our current policy and procedure. We provide a list of consulting foresters that landowners can work with. When I mentioned a consulting forester referral, it's part of our accomplishment system that we record it. So anytime that we make a management referral, stewardship plan referral, or an urban referral, we count it as a referral to a management referral. So again, just like this webinar, to be certified, there'll be a listing of personnel that can provide these type of plans. We do the same as far as a consultant forester, provide a list that we manage with the agency. They also have to be registered with the board. They have to be a registered forester and fill out an affidavit for a consultant forester. So again, a lot of our counties, you can go to our website, we'll have a list of consultant foresters that landowners can be provided a list, but we do not recommend one over the other.
And they say, thanks for the clarification. Also a comment that's come in the Q&A from Robert Cabelli. Enjoyed the program. It's fun to see how folks are addressing water quality around the country. So thank you there, Robert. So at this time, I don't see any more questions that have come in, Ron. It looks like everything's been addressed in the chat. Is there anything else before we wrap up?
No, just hopefully we're going to be recording it, but also some contact information has been provided by the presenters. Mine is ron.myers@ncagr.gov. So certainly you can go direct with any of us agency personnel or presenters today for any follow-up questions you may have.
So we have one poll question left before we let everybody go. And this one has to do with pre-harvest plan writing. So I'm going to launch this poll, and if you guys take a moment to respond. So it looks like most folks have responded. I'm going to last call for you to, if you haven't responded yet, to do so now. Okay, let me end the poll. And I'm going to share the results. As you can see, 21% are absolutely going to do it. And then about 54% are going to, have a likely chance of doing it. And then 7 of you have indicated not at all. So thanks for sharing that information with us. That will help the team here as they go forward with this project and everything.
And also you provide some follow-up questions after the workshop as well, Bob?
Yep, so that's part of the post survey that they'll fill out before they go on to fill out the CFE form. So we do ask that you fill that out, and there is a place for, if you have additional comments, those are always helpful. Giving us feedback to make things like this better, as well as to help with the design of the programs and things like that. So please do take the time to complete that survey and add comments in. It only really takes a minute or two to do, and it's very useful. And with that, Ron, I think that's a wrap for this webinar.
Yep, and we want to thank you as well, Bob, for your efforts as the moderator and hosting us today. So thanks all to the participants.
You're welcome. Thanks, everybody.